get started. So at this point, Madam Clerk, we'll start with item number 1.
Appointment of Gary Keith of 22 Midland Street, Brockton, Mass. 02301 to the Brockton Community Cable Television for a term of 3 years. Invited, Gary Keith.
Mr. Keith? Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Anything you'd like to say?
I'm just hoping that the board finds me favorably that to appoint me to the Cable Advisory Committee. As everyone here knows, I've served already for the past 4 years on the Planning Board and on the Zoning Board, and I believe that I served it very well. I served it to the best of my ability, and I want to continue to serve the city that I live in, the city that I love, and I'm open to any questions that you may have, sir.
Very good. Questions, comments, concerns, councilors? Councilor Beauregard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, good evening. How are you?
Good evening.
First of all, I want to thank you for serving our nation. It's always appreciated.
Thank you.
But I'm going to be upfront with you. I will not be voting for you, and it's not a reflection on you and your how would I say it, contributions to the city and who you are. But we're at a point now where there are more men serving on all the governing boards in this city and very few women. And it's to the point where I'm wondering if I need to go to the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. Women play an enormous role in our city, and I know if tomorrow the women that work for the 4th largest school department in the city, and our great city, I'm facing 2 of them now, didn't go to work, I don't want to think of the ramifications that would happen. It's time now for women to be represented and their voice to be heard, and so this is no reflection on you. You're a man, and I can't support you right now. So, but I'm telling you right now, I'm grateful for all you've done, and I know you'll be involved in our city again, and I wanted to be very upfront with that. So this is not a reflection on you. This is a reflection on the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other councilors, comments and concerns?
On the motion?
On the motion, Councilor Fowle.
On the motion, I'm going to preface these remarks by saying I think whenever the mayor appoints someone to a position, it's a great honor. Mm-hmm. And I think we as a council have a responsibility to evaluate the temperament, the judgment, and the background of a person who's being appointed. So I have a few questions, and the first one is, what is your understanding of what the board does, the Brockton Community Cable Access Board does?
To be totally honest with you, Counselor, only from my association of being on the, as a participating in their forum, talking to Mark Lindy and some of his staff, not much. But at the same time, when I was appointed 4 years ago to the planning board, I was also a novice, okay? And one of the people that serve on the boards, both of them, that I have great respect for, which is Bob Pelagi.
He's a sweetheart.
After my 3rd year there, when we were actually getting ready to appoint someone from the planning board to the zoning board, and my name was brought up to go back to the zoning board, Bob Pelagi withdrew his name. And the statement he said to me was he had no problem withdrawing his name from the zoning board because he saw how much I have grown into my position and the knowledge that I learned in doing it. Now, whether it means anything to anybody here, coming from Mr. Pelagi, that was a very big compliment for me. So I'm not here to play games with any appointment. I didn't do it while sitting on the planning board and the zoning board. As you know, it takes a lot of time out of our personal lives, okay? And I served it for 4 years, and I will continue to do that, and I will continue to learn in my position.
So the fair answer is that you really have no idea what that board does?
No, I don't, not too much.
Okay. All right, when you were appointed to the planning board, I believe that was in 2014, the public record was replete with some issues that swirled around your candidacy, and some of the people who were on the council back then actually commented. Was there a court case in which you were found responsible for damage to a rental unit and money owed to the landlord and a judgment entered against you? And if so, has that been satisfied?
There were actually 2 judgments that were against me at 2 different times. And yes, one has been satisfied, and the other one there are still payments being made to. However, I would like to say that when you're renting, sometimes, and this is no excuse at all because it was found by the courts, and like I said, restitution has been being paid. However, against my better judgment, and that's a bad choice of words. Was it or should it have been? No. But at the same time, I'm actually doing what the court ordered, and there has been payments being made, which I can show you that proof on that, and I can also show you the proof that the other one has been satisfied, which I do agree with.
Okay, the other public record is a fine that was levied by the Office of Campaign Political Finance in the amount of $1,375 for not filing.
Satisfied, sir.
I beg your pardon?
All satisfied.
That's satisfied?
All
Because
satisfied.
as of today, it was still listed as active.
No, sir.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I guess my last question is, and we've heard this, and you and I have been together with some other counselors for a few years, that you have extensive experience in law enforcement.
I do.
Where did you work? What department and for how long?
Sir, I worked in the Department of Corrections here at Bridgewater. I worked at the University of Pittsburgh Police Department. I worked at the City of Pittsburgh Police Department. I worked at the Boston Housing Police Department. And that totals over 20 years, sir.
Okay, as a sworn police officer?
As a sworn police officer, sir.
Okay. I just found it odd that you wouldn't specify all that on your resume, because it certainly is something to be proud of.
It is something to be proud of.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Counsel. Any other, Counsel Sullivan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Keith.
How you doing, Mr. Sullivan?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I'll be quite blunt, Gary. Relative to social media, you're a very big proponent of social media. But recently, I personally took offense to some social media writings that you did relative to this esteemed body, the city council, specifically talking about the Martin Luther King NAACP breakfast,
Correct.
which I haven't missed the 12 years I've been a city councilor. But I believe, and I'm going to paraphrase it, I don't have it 100%, but what you're saying is that city councilors do not miss St. Patrick's Day or missing drinking green beer. I thought that was a shot that didn't need to be done, number one. And as an Irish person, I was like, what is this? What are you talking about?
Well-
So I'd like you to clarify that if you could.
I will clarify it. There are some members of the city council that have not attended the Martin Luther King breakfast, okay? And as you know, for the past 3 elections, I've also ran, okay? And I take Martin Luther King as seriously as you take St. Patrick's Day, okay? And there's no offense, it's just St. Patrick's Day was the day I used, because I see that on St. Patrick's Day, which is not a legal holiday, everybody is there, okay? I mean, it's like the calendars are set aside and cleared for that day. That's okay. But at the same time, I talked to a lot of counselors, okay? And I won't say a lot, it wasn't the whole body, but I talked to counselors who have in their, hey, how come you didn't make it? Well, I had a previous agenda, okay? But it was the same people over the past 4 years. So I did make that comment, and I stand behind that comment, because one thing I will do is that my yes will always be a yes and my no will always be a no. And it wasn't to offend everybody, but it was to awaken some people that, you know, it's being noticed that, you know, we have a big diverse community here in Brockton, you know, and as much as we support everything, I believe that we should give that same effort to everything that goes on in the city. Okay, so it wasn't towards you personally. You and I have talked on plenty of occasions, and I've always been able to approach you, and vice versa. So if it was something personal towards you, I would have told you so. You know, but I'm not going to back off of my comment. I did make that comment.
Yeah, okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Counsel. Any other comments or concerns from the
If
council?
everyone's spoken.
Is everyone back to Counsel Fowler?
Yeah, just for the benefit of Mr. Keith and my colleagues, I'm just not going to support someone who has no idea what the position is about. I don't think that's doing a service to our residents. I don't think it's doing a service to the board. That particular board sets policy for Brockton Community Access. It has budgeting responsibilities. It has personnel responsibilities. And it just seems to me you've got to have some basic understanding of the job which you're entering into if you're going to be able to make coherent and competent decisions. And the other thing I might add is, and this applies to all of us, Mr. Keith is once again a declared candidate for office. I do not believe that elected officials should have any policy-making role with respect to the media. That's why we see people who are commentators on TV and they become candidates and they're immediately booted off. And it just shouldn't be. It should be, the media should be free of any and all political interference, policy making, or anything else that comes from elected officials. And I thank the chairman for recognizing me again.
Thank you, Councilor.
Mr. Chair, if I may address the councilor.
Mr. Keith.
First of all, sir, the election is over, and I have not declared my candidacy again for another position as of this time. But when you talk about experience, when you ran for mayor the first time, what experience did you have?
I can
Okay.
answer that if you like. I had 10 years on the school committee, including budgeting, collective bargaining, public safety and security, curriculum subcommittee, and I had a master's degree from Boston University in education.
Well, I have an associate's degree in administration of justice. I also have management experience of owning my own company, which is Bostonian Security Corporation. Okay, so experience is something that you learn as you go along. Okay, and you can be book smart all you want, you can be classroom smart, but going into the mayor's position was a totally different position for anyone. No one runs for the mayor's position with experience. No one runs for the president's position with experience. And I just want to put that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Keith. We have a motion on the floor. It's already been seconded. What's the wishes of the committee, the council? To send it forward? Motion's been made and seconded to approve. All in favor? We usually do with hands, are we at finance? Yeah, just tell me what tell me what you want to do.
Yeah.
All in favor? Opposed? It goes back to the finance committee with unfavorable recommendation.
Thank you.
Item number 2, Madam Clerk.
Order appropriation of the total grant in the amount of $154,065 from Executive Office of Elders Affairs Fiscal Year 18 Formula Grant to City of Brockton Council on Aging Fiscal Year 18 Formula Grant Fund. Invited Honorable Mayor Bill Carpenter, John A. Condon, Chief Financial Officer, Janice Fitzgerald, Director, Council on Aging.
Good evening, how are you?
I'm great. How
Nice
are you?
to see
Thanks.
you.
Good to see you.
Any comments?
No, nothing from me.
Motion been made and seconded to move the recommendation favorably. All in favor? Opposed? Favorable recommendation back to the council. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have item number 3.
Order appropriation of $975,000 from Stabilization Fund to Fiscal Year 17 Police Personal Services Retroactive Payment, including all overtime. Fiscal Year 18 Police Personal Services other than overtime, and Fiscal Year 18 Police Personal Services overtime, including impact and license overtime. The CFO, in accordance with Section 5 of Chapter 324 of the Acts of 1990, certifies the proposed appropriation of $975,000 for purposes of funding the Police Supervisors Union contract for fiscal year 18 only. This is a conditional certification. Invited, Honorable Mayor Bill Carpenter, John A. Condon, Chief Financial Officer, John Crowley, Chief, Brockton Police Department.
Councilors, I did have a chance to talk to the chief yesterday afternoon, and he did forward to me an email. He unfortunately couldn't make it here this evening because of medical procedures for tomorrow, so that is why he is not present here this evening. Mr. Condon is here to hold the gauntlet here. Mr. Condon, how are you?
Evening, Mr. Chairman, councilors. This is a request to fund the first 2 years of a 3-year contract with the Brockton Police Supervisors Union. It'll be a contract which goes through the period of June 30 of 2019, so it'll put it on the same basis as the other contracts with the city unions which have already been approved. This is the last contract with the city unions to receive a request for funding. So if this is approved, we're settled with all of our unions through June 30, 2019 on the city side. The school unions, I think, are settled through the end of this fiscal year. So in any case, it is a contract which largely mirrors the contracts which the council has already approved for the firefighters union, which includes both the firefighters and the brass officers of the firefighters, and for the police patrolmen. And it has a couple of places where it differs, so I'll take you through what's similar and what the differences are. Among other provisions, it provides for 3 years of base wage increase to a total of 5.75%. That's consistent with all of the unions that have settled so far in the city. And that pattern is 2%, 2%, and then a final 1.75% to come on July 1st of this fiscal year. Like the firefighters contract and the police patrolmen's union contract, it gains a substance abuse policy for the city with the same provisions as were in that those other policies, and the compensation in exchange for gaining that policy is also the same. Contract raises hazardous duty pay by 5.25% on base, and for firearms pay by 0.5% of base. So that percentage amount compares to the other two unions. In addition, similar to the fire and patrolman's contract, it creates a new top step for employees who have 27 years of creditable service in the police department, and they will receive additional compensation of 2% of base. There's already a 28 and 29-year step in the contract. It provides for an annual sick leave buyback of up to 10 days of sick leave for employees. They have to have at least 75 days on the book. The payment is made to their deferred compensation fund, and the sick balance is reduced day for day for those payments. So actually it's an exchange of deferred compensation for a reduction in sick days if you've got 75 days in the books. In exchange for a conversion of an unrestricted personal day to a professional development day, so basically they're going from one less unrestricted day off to one which has to be used for a professional development, the agreement provides for an additional 1% in firearm pay. It also provides an additional increase of $125 in the defibrillator pay, and this is granted on July 1, 2016, so it's fully retroactive. The employees in the union who are not on a 4 and 2 schedule, they're on a revised work schedule benefit for those who are on a 5-day schedule, and that's amended. It's already in place, but that's amended, and it grants, with an effective date of January 1, 2018, it grants 4 days more per year, one each quarter. These last couple of items are intended to grant additional compensation parity with the firefighters brass, who have a couple of pay items which push them ahead of the supervisors union. The union has agreed to allow a new position, not in this union, but it will be performing some of the duties that some of the officers in this union used to provide. So it's agreed to a new position for Director of Communications and Community Outreach. It'll be outside the union and not part of the chain of command. It will report to the chief or the applicable supervisor in the absence of the chief. The city agreed that supervisors assigned, in addition to this provision, there was another provision. The city agreed that the supervisors who are assigned to patrol division, that assignment can be bid on shift by seniority. So the decision to make an assignment to the patrol division or any division within the department belongs to the chief. But if the decision is made to make that assignment, the shift bidding is by seniority of the officers. We've also agreed to replicate a provision in the fire union contract to pay an additional hour of compensation for each hour actually worked on a holiday on which the employee was scheduled to work in order to reduce overtime. And finally, the city agreed that newly appointed sergeants shall perform the functions of a patrol supervisor for a minimum of 3 years following that appointment. So our newly appointed sergeants, before they move on into anything else, will be getting more patrol experience in the supervisory role. There were a couple of grievance settlements which were to the benefit of the city. They're in the back pages of that contract. One had to do with a dispute with respect to grade pay for lieutenants serving as captains. We settled the grievance for a modest amount of money. In the future, that won't be taking place. And another one which had to do with credible years of service. There won't be any retroactivity on that. It'll be basically on the date of crediting of those years of service for that supplemental longevity step. So that's basically the contract. It was provided to the clerk, and I think all the counselors would be available through the clerk's office. And I'll take any questions if you have questions on the contract.
Councilor Cruz. You're welcome.
First off, where are we on the stabilization fund?
Let's see, it's in the package. I think it's about $4 million and change. Let's see if I can find that letter. I don't see the letter, but it was about 4.6 million and change at the time the contract was filed.
Okay. And can you just explain the one that I didn't quite get, that hour for hour worked on a holiday that they're scheduled?
Yeah, it's been in the firefighter's contract for a while. So if you're scheduled to work on a designated holiday and you actually show up for work, you get some extra pay, which is cheaper than the overtime rate if the person calls in and we've got to fill that job at overtime. That's the idea, is to reduce the overtime payment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Faho.
I'm going to take a few minutes tonight because I probably look at this differently than anyone else, having been a member of the police department, and very grateful for everything that the police department did for me and the city did for me. And also serving as mayor, I probably look at things a lot differently. And I'm always concerned when I read a conditional certification that the chief financial officer is concerned about what will the impact be after June 30th, 2018. You know, in collective bargaining, neither side is usually happy. It's most important that you bargain in good faith, and it's very important that you be fair. So before we jump ahead to another contract, I'd like to take a look at where we are right now, and I'd like to ask the clerk to hand out a copy of this to each of the counselors. And again, this is where we are now. This is a page that was taken from the FY 2018 budget book prepared by Mr. Condon, and I have redacted the names along the side. It has the 6 captains, the 12 lieutenants, and the 20 sergeants, because it isn't the people we're talking about, it's the positions and the finances. And I just arbitrarily to ask myself, have we been fair? Have we been fair bargaining with the police and in particular with the ranking officers who really are in charge of making sure that the entire department functions properly and that the men under them and the women who are under them are well taken care of, well trained and supported? So if you look at under lieutenants, I just went down to the 3rd one. I have no idea who it is. It starts off, the person obviously has 30% of educational incentive. But then I want you to take a look over under night shift differential. That person receives $10,241. They receive $5,395 for holiday. They receive $8,534 for weekend and firearm. They receive $3,414 for hazardous duty. And they receive $1,800 for defibrillator training or use. That's $33,376 before you even get to educational incentive and their base salary. Next, you add in for this particular person educational incentive of $25,603, and then they have a base salary of $85,342. So their total, again, without overtime, without court time, without details, which are paid for privately, not by the city, this particular person, whomever it may be, makes $151,416. As a matter of fact, everyone on this document, if you look at this right-hand column, does not make under $100,000. So I do think we've been fair. And by the way, I have no problem with this. And I will say to all of the men sitting up there, I do not have a problem with this. I think this is fine. I think it's fair. I think it's been bargained. I certainly think you earn it every day. But now I'm concerned with where we're going. And where we're going, I'm going to start off with Section 14, this job description for this civilian Director of Communications and Community Outreach. Councilor Derenoncourt's not here. Councilor Nicastro is new. The mayor is once again coming back, and he wants to appoint a civilian to handle those two particular duties within the police department. And I presume the salary will be, again, $90,000 a year. What an utter waste. We have 6 captains and a police chief who collectively probably have about $1.3 million in salaries. And we can't devise a community outreach or a media relations program with those 6 captains and that chief of police? If we can't, then we've got a real problem. But that is an utter waste of money. It shouldn't happen, and I'm not going to vote for the money for this contract if that stays in. And now let me read something to you very interesting. And if you go to section 14, which is the Director of Communications and Community Outreach new position, look at item C. Superior officers will no longer be responsible for communicating with the public, except as designated by the chief in the director's absence. I'm going to read that again. Superior officers will no longer be responsible for communicating with the public, except as designated by the chief in the director's absence. And I don't want to hear a lot of razzle-dazzle about, well, that's not really what it means and this and that. Can you imagine having a lieutenant go out to the scene of an incident and having a couple of neighbors come out of a house and say, gee, can you tell me what's going on? I'm sorry, I can't talk to you. I haven't been authorized by the chief, and you got to call the Director of Community Relations and Outreach. Are you kidding me? The whole essence of police work, the whole essence of what they do is to wear that uniform proudly, interact with the public, stop and talk to kids, stop and talk to business people, treat people with the utmost courtesy and respect, because when you go to solve a crime, when you need the help of the public, the goodwill that you've built up is what's going to get the job done. So that position, as far as I'm concerned, is utter nonsense, and I passionately feel that way because I did police community relations. Detective Luciano, who is now retired, was kind of the first bilingual community relations person, and he did a hell of a job on it. And that's what all police officers should do. So now I want to go to section, bear with me a minute. Let's go to the sick leave buyback, section 7. I don't really have a problem with sick leave buyback because to the extent that it fosters people's willingness to come into work when maybe they've got a sore throat and they don't feel well, we don't have to call someone in overtime, and if they have the 75 days and they want to sell them back, that's fine. But this is cute because instead of your regular day's pay, they've built into this contract that the sick day you buy back will be at the weekend rate, which is higher. Now you might say, well, you know, it's a couple of $1,000s here or there. The fact of the matter is we're not a rich city. The fact of the matter is what we put into this contract by approving the appropriation is going to be sought by other unions. I'm sure Officer Healy, to the extent there are things in here that he doesn't have, he'd be crazy if he didn't go after them. So if you want sick leave buyback, I say figure out the person's daily rate, don't add in any multiplier or anything that makes that rate increase, and go with that. 4 extra vacation days. Again, that may seem not like much, but let's say 20 people are on that particular schedule and they qualify for, and I didn't mean to turn my back on you, especially after what you said about men earlier. Let's say just 20 people qualify for those 4 extra days. That's 80 days. That's 80 shifts, potentially, that we've got to fill in overtime. Now, if anyone here thinks we've got money floating around, I know some of the humorists in the city think Mr. Condon's hiding it. I don't believe it, because I know better. But from this day forward, we've got to be smart, and we've got to be careful, and we've got to take care of our employees, but we also have to be fair to the residents. We took an oath on January 1st to do that. And one of the reasons why I suck as a politician is because I can't just bury my head and go along and be the good guy. I actually take that oath seriously, And I do think I have a responsibility to the residents of the city to be fair to them as well as to these everyday heroes who go out and protect us. Seniority in bidding. That is something that has been opposed by Councilor Studensky when he was the police chief, by Chief Conlon, and by Chief Gomes. Every shift is different. 8 to 4 shift is different than the 4 to 12. 4 to 12 is different than 12 to 8. You have different types of incidents, you have different people you meet. Why on earth would we want to take away from the police chief the management prerogative to pick and choose the sergeants or the lieutenants or the captains that he or she, because this is going to live on after just Chief Crowley, why would we want to take that management prerogative away? Can you imagine the colonel of state police giving up the right to assign people to barracks? Can you imagine the school superintendent saying, I'll just let principals bid as to where they want to be. Go pick where you want, which school you want by seniority. That again, is utter nonsense. It just is a management prerogative that should never be given up because you want to take the right person and put them in the right position to make them successful. Now, if you want an example, I worked with a lieutenant once who was book smart, but I wouldn't let him walk my dog. He had an acerbic personality. The dog probably would have bitten him, but he was book smart. He studied, he did well on the tests, but I'm not going to put him on the day shift to interact with a lot of people. I'm probably going to put him on the night shift where if a legal question comes up, there's no DA on duty, the courts are closed, that person is going to be able to answer a question and provide some guidance to the patrolmen and officers who are working. So that is just, again, I can't understand it. And I don't blame Mr. Condon and the team. If you haven't been a mayor and you haven't worked in a uniform, you're not going to understand these things. You're not. No matter how many people may talk to you, you're just not going to have the flavor for what actually goes on and how some of these language items affect the police department. And the last one I have is the 2% increase after 27 years. Now, what they've done is they've taken the language that's in Chapter 32, which is the retirement statute, where you get creditable service for past work. And they've incorporated it into this contract so that, let's say I do 5 years with the Department of Corrections, when I'm appointed to the Brockton PD, I do 22 years, I'm going to qualify for that. So they've taken what originally, and by the way, which I think is in the patrolman's contract, you have to have 27 years here in Brockton. They've taken that, and instead of making it a longevity benefit that is solely connected to your service in Brockton, and they've expanded it. Again, someone might say, who cares? It's not a lot of money, but in the aggregate, it adds up, and other people are going to want that same benefit. And I'm going to close by saying, if you don't think unions chase what other unions do, take a look at this document, and it is replete with mention that, look under number 6, defibrillator. In order to reduce the disparity in total wage benefits between Brockton Fire and Police Department personnel. Everyone piggyback. I was there, I know. We all piggyback on one another. Well, if you got it, I want it. And if you've got it, I'm going to go after it. So I guess what I'm saying, folks, is I have no problem with 90% of this. But the items that I've just mentioned, I think deserve a very hard look. I think this contract ought to go back. I think that the items that I have mentioned, I certainly would like to see taken out. And then I have no problem with it because we want to be fair to our employees. But the giveaways have to stop. The padding, the layering of benefit after benefit after benefit have got to be brought under control. Because the one thing I don't want, and I'm going to look every one of those men in the eye and tell you this, the one thing I don't want is I don't want us to sign a contract and then find out a year or 2 or 3 from now that while we're bound by that contract, we don't have the money and we have to lay someone off. Because the psychological impact to an entire community and the psychological impact to an individual who's laid off from a police or fire position, or any position for that matter, but particularly public safety, is very profound. Officer Healy was laid off. He knows what it's like, and he was most appreciative when we were able to bring him back. It's something that I don't ever want to see happen, and for that reason, these particular issues in this contract that I've mentioned are problematic for me. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. Mr. Condon, any Anything you want to say at this point, or you just want to?
Well,
keep us to the
I'm
questions
sorry,
and concerns?
was the council looking to speak?
No, I'm asking you, if you go
Okay,
right ahead,
well,
and I'll take council.
The council raised a lot of
so I
points.
would think you'd wanna-
Many of his issues have to do with comparability between one contract and another contract. Some didn't. The shift bidding is unique to this particular union. The public affairs officer is unique to this particular union. Much of the rest of it is, as he described it, it is a case of a union seeing what's in another contract and they're looking to get to parity. One of our concerns in this particular contract had to do with, we were at the table for a long time. This is the last one we settled. The list of issues to be bargained, especially from the other side of the table, I don't mean this to be critical, I'm just saying it as a fact, and I don't want to go into what they put out and what we pulled back, and that's a private process. But the list of issues that they put on the table was extensive, and they fought long and hard because they thought that most of those issues were items that they deserved to see incorporated into the contract. And because of that list, and because of some other issues, which the city was seeking to gain, we weren't able to make a lot of progress, even though we all knew the basic settlement pattern that was going to finally result as a result of the contracts that have already been settled before us. It took us until December before we finally made a point where it looked like both sides were willing to pull back on some of the issues which were never going to get us to settlement in order to get to settlement. And after that, through a few more negotiating sessions, the contract that we're going through tonight is what resulted. It is not a cheap contract. These are not inexpensive employees. I agree with Councilor Farwell. They earn the money they're making. I don't think the councilor took any exception to the officers and their salaries that they're making. They are expensive, but I think it was fair. From the city's perspective, we had a couple of major concerns and obviously some issues that the mayor wanted to gain. But the major concern we had was, in Massachusetts, public safety unions have a right to go to an arbitration panel. We don't get to finally say we're not going to give you the raise and say that's the end of it. There's a process where they can get to a body called the Joint Labor Management Committee, and that committee is typically very generous to the union side. Management doesn't often do well there. Now, I will say, if we got an arbitration award there, which was something that we thought was unfavorable, the final decision belongs to the funding body of the city. That's the city council. So you could vote that one down if it came from the JLMC, just as you could vote to disapprove the items in this contract because you're voting the money. But our concern was that we would spend a lot of money in fighting in front of the JLMC, and that the process would be disruptive to morale and to the service to the citizens. So you can accept that as being why we settled, or you can say you should have fought it. Each of you has your own opinion on that, and you're entitled to it. With the issues that were not really part of comparability discussions, the public affairs officer is something that the mayor was very insistent on, as you raised. It was something he wanted to gain. He had a couple of other items that he wanted to gain, which we didn't gain. This is really, of all of his list, the only one we were able to get. He is convinced, he can speak for himself, but we talked about it a lot. He wasn't at the table. We would consult back and forth. We talked a lot about it. He was convinced that, notwithstanding the fact that these officers have training in public communications, that oftentimes it isn't a job they're particularly happy to do, and that as a result of that, that it would be helpful to have a professional person doing that communication. That is the mayor's view on that. He gained it in this contract. We will see, if you fund it, whether that makes for a better outreach process to the public and to the news media or not. I think there is a pretty fair case to be made that the city isn't getting the best representation with respect to news media in terms of police issues, and perhaps this would be a better way to go. The other was the shift bidding. We had a long discussion with this. I don't believe we would have settled the contract had we not granted the shift bidding. I might be wrong. That's my assessment sitting at the table. Before we granted the shift bidding, we had long discussions with the chief of police. He'd have preferred it not go into the contract, no doubt about it. He also said he could live with it because the right that he retained is the right to make the assignment of the officer to the division in the first place. And after that, he wasn't as troubled. Councilor Farwell makes a good point. Each shift is somewhat different, and personalities are different. But he wasn't too troubled by the thought that I will have seniority governing when these guys get assigned to time on shift and when not, as long as I can make the first assignment. So in general, that's how I'd respond to Councilor Farwell. One final comment on his comments have to do with these conditional certification. I've been granting these conditional certifications now for about 10 years. The primary reason I'm doing that is that about that time, the state reduced our state aid by $8 or $10 million, and that reduction has continued. We don't have the capacity of our own resources to create revenues to replace that. And that 8 to 10 million today with inflation should be 20. We just with a 2.5% increase on our tax base plus the amount of new growth we get in the city, it is impossible to generate the kind of revenue that would replace all of that. And my conditional certification has meant that we would see probably some decline in services. We've done it for the most part without layoffs, but not so on the school side. There have been school layoffs, as you've seen. And the general fund funds a good portion of that school budget, not all, but a good portion of it. And that impact of revenue incapacity has affected that budget. In the time I've made those conditional certifications, we've also had layoffs on the city side, and we've had invisible layoffs, which is basically a position opens up and you don't fill it because it's cheaper not to have to fill the job. That person isn't laid off, but that job isn't filled, and you don't have a face in City Hall or at DPW Highway Barn that would have been there before. So that, I think I've been right on. The council's right. We're not hiding money just because we've got cash in the bank. It does not mean it's available to spend. There are all kinds of reasons for that. We don't need to get into that now. The final comment on that, I have said for a long time that the city is not revenue rich enough to be able to undertake capital projects without asking the voters to support them by going outside 2.5. Other communities do it. We've tended not to do it. In fact, not tended, we have not done it. So we've put a fair amount of money into an annual budget, which is debt related, which is supported by property taxes within the 2.5 limit. And for a long time we had utility services which were fully self-supporting. For a while now, it hasn't been the case in the water budget, and that means that the tax base has had to step in to supplement the water rates to provide essential water services. I don't think we can afford to do that either. So those are the reasons for my conditional certifications. I'm just saying if we can get it done this year, we're doing it. We do it with our eyes wide open. I make no promises with the years to come because the conditions that we're facing are what they are, and those are my responses to the councilor's comments.
Thank you, Mr. Condon. Councilor Rodriguez? Well, I put you down, and I saw you first before her, so.
I'll let it go.
Councilor Beauregard?
You don't want to get upset.
I'm sorry, I would like to know if the new president of the police union is here this evening?
I am, ma'am.
Yeah, could you stand please? Your phone, congratulations.
Thank you.
And
The committee has no problem with him speaking, correct? Okay, ask me first. Councilor, go through me first.
Lieutenant Brian Maker. Yep. Gotcha. Yep. Yep. Thank you.
So that is one thing. And quite frankly, I, along with my colleague, will not support an individual that's hired that is not part of the police force for communication and outreach. Because I believe that every day you're out there communicating with individuals and other colleagues to try to improve the safety in the city. I speak to several police officers often. I spend lots of time at the License Commission meeting, and most recently, a lot at the Board of Health, where a police officer was necessary. And we had the honor and pleasure of having a few of the representatives, captain and lieutenants, present at community meetings in the city. And I believe that's the way to communicate and work closely with the community to build trust, further expand our communication to demonstrate that we're a city that's not only a great place to live, but also one that looks forward to improving our conditions, and that happens with everyone working together. So I want to wish you good luck.
Yep.
I want to thank you, and I just want to make it clear that I will not be supporting a community outreach individual that's not part of, I'm going to put that in quotes, your team. So thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Rodriguez?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Condon, I too sympathize, or I agree with most of the points that Council Farwell made. But in addition to that, on item 12, We are basically looking to give these fine folks, and if councilors remember, last year I actually had submitted an order to increase the number of sergeants in the police department as a friend of the brass within the police department, and that item died off. So we'll see what happens this time around. But we're looking at an item here that basically is providing a signing bonus to 39 individuals for about $800, right?
Right.
And when you multiply 39 individuals at $800 apiece, that's around $31,000 in additional funds that we are going to have to pay out. And as you have said, and a lot of people have said, we are looking at a budget that's going to be devastating to this community. And $31,000 could mean another position in the school department of somebody that we're going to have to lay off. And this is just a signing bonus that we're about to give. And as we saw in here, some individuals making a decent living. Again, not that they don't earn what they make, but they're making a decent living. But yet we are willing to basically take away $31,000 from the city coffers to provide signing bonuses to individuals. I think that was it was basically not a great deal. I don't think a great deal of thinking went into that, to be honest with you. Additionally, we have several other unions in this community, several other bargaining units in the community. We saw from the contract that, you know, one union will borrow the argument from another union. We've got the patrolman union, and they too will be coming to this body in a couple years saying, where is my stuff? Where is my bonus? Where is my sick time? Because if you give it to one, when is it going to stop? That's the bottom line. We're looking at some of the other unions that we have in the community. When does it stop? Are the DPW folks, the folks that work in the water department, not as valuable to the community as well? So when their time comes, arguing their stances and what they need from the community for us to say, well, no, we gave it to the police supervisors and the fire department, but we're not going to be able to give it to you. So when does it stop? And in addition, why do we keep, and I brought this up several years ago when I first got into this council, why do we keep agreeing to contracts, 3-year contracts, when we can only certify it a year or two? If we can only certify a year or two, then we should agree on a year or 2-year contract. Because what's going to happen, it's going to put this community in a bind where 2 years from now, either we're going to look into laying some additional people off or cutting some of the other unions short and not be able to give what we have done in the past. Now, I know we're quoting the fire department all over the place here. If that was given or done to the fire department, it doesn't mean that we have to physically do it to every single other union in this community. I mean, it's got to stop somewhere. I mean, we are honestly a broken city. We can't afford, if you look at the budget, basically in terms of infrastructure, in terms of doing something in addition to providing salaries to staff, to employees in this community, we don't have a single iota of resources to put it anyplace else to promote the city or do the other things that we need to do. You see, most of the cities in this Commonwealth are doing well because they're able to invest in the community. We have not been able to do that because every single thing that we get coming in taxes or in grants, they're basically designed to pay for employees or pay staff. But it's going to get to a point where we have to stop. You know, we can't just keep this thing going because you just said it a few minutes ago. There's what, $4 million in the stabilization fund. We have some lawsuits pending that we have no idea what's going to happen with those. We are looking, the way things are going, there's no way we're not going to bankrupt this city. The way it's going, there's absolutely no way we're not going to bankrupt this city. Because we cannot just open up our wallets anytime we want to do the things that we're doing in this community, because that is irresponsible as far as I as a taxpayer is concerned. And I know we keep bringing this 2.5 up. You know, we need to go above the 2.5, above the 2.5. You know what? I think the way we're going, we might have to go over the 20%, 30% in order to make ends meet. because 2.5, a little over 2.5 isn't going to do it. But it's going to get to a point where we have to step back and say, when is enough enough? You know, and honestly, and I've said this before and I'm going to say it again, if we have people negotiating these contracts and all they're doing is sitting at the table shaking their heads, yes, 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 then those individuals shouldn't be negotiating contracts. We should not have individuals who are just willing to shake their heads at the negotiation table. It's going to get to a point where we have to put our foot down and basically say, look, this is what we've got. We've got $5. We can't buy $10 worth of groceries. And I think that's it's going to get done one of these days, one way or the other, but I think we should start looking at when can we possibly start putting the brakes on, because it's getting a little ridiculous.
Thank you, Councilor.
May I respond to some of that?
Go ahead, Mr. Condon.
Start first of all with the yes, yes, yes comment. That's not how we've been negotiated, Counselor. That's not a fair characterization of the negotiations. You may not like the results of these negotiations. You may feel that there was a cheaper way to do it, and I accept that, but it is not true that we just simply sit there shaking our head, yes, yes, yes. Otherwise, we would not have been at the table for over 2 years. That's first of all, number one. Number two, if we were to simply say we're only going to settle for 1 year, we wouldn't have settlements. You could live with that. There's a consequence to that. The consequence is disruption in your workforce, dissatisfaction in your workforce. It may be a reasonable strategy if you're looking to really reduce the cost of the labor in the city of Brockton and doing it over the longer term by doing it that way. You know, we could try it, but I'm saying I don't think it would be successful because of the expectation and the obligation under Chapter 150E to bargain, and the expectation that the bargaining is going to be for more than a 1-year cycle. We could try it. If we reject this contract tonight on the basis of money, which is, you know, you can have your views on the contract with respect to the language provisions in there, but you're voting on money. If you vote down the money, it doesn't mean that we go back to the table and accept the mayor is the guy who's in charge of the bargaining here and accept any of your objections. It simply means we're at a stalemate and we have to return to the table, and I don't know what results from that. Something might come back that looks something like what you're asking for. Something might come back that looks different. That's simply how bargaining goes. Your obligation is to express your opinions as you've done and to vote the money yay or nay. Back at the table, we may not reach resolution at all. So I don't want to keep beating the point. It's clear that some of the council here, I'm not sure because I haven't heard from everybody, it's clear that some of the council here thinks there are a couple of issues here with respect to this contract, some of which are particular to the contract itself, some of which are particular to the overall negotiating process and the cost of labor and collective bargaining in the city. I accept those points. I understand where you're coming from on them, but I don't think it's going to do me any good at this point to simply try to argue the point back and forth, because I think you know where you stand on the contract, what the arguments are for it, and what the arguments you feel are against it. I will answer any other questions, but in terms of debating it, I don't think it's...
Thank you, Mr. Condon. Councilor Sullivan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Condon. Mr. Condon, from the city side, not the police supervisor side, who sits at the table other than yourself?
Typically, there's an attorney and the personnel director, and sometimes the attorney differs depending...
From the solicitor's office?
Yes, that's right, or an outside counsel. In this case, there was a person who was a city solicitor on the payroll for a while and then left and continued that work as outside counsel.
Okay. So in my prior life, when I was the attorney in Randolph, I sat with the police and the fire, negotiated, and Mr. Fowle hit it on the head. I mean, it's in good faith, and, you know, police try to get their best, city tries to get their best. But I guess one of the questions I have, relative to the director of communication, I have a problem with that position, and it sounds like a lot of people do. But I guess from a due diligence perspective, when you go to the table and you sit down with Mr. Maker, what other police department in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has that position? Because that would be important to know.
Yeah, I believe the city of Boston does, but I'm speaking with third-hand knowledge, not direct knowledge, Councilor, but that would be my answer. To the best of my knowledge, at least the city of Boston does, but I'm not certain about others.
And so when you explain this summarization of that position, it's a non-union position, it's a citizen that works for the police department, but who does that person, he or she, actually be a direct report to?
To the chief of police.
To the chief of police?
Yes.
Who hires that person?
Well, I would say it's the chief of police, but obviously the mayor would have a direct influence on that. And
but that must have been discussed during the negotiation.
Yes,
what was the answer on that?
The chief. The direct report would have the hiring responsibility.
So the mayor would have no,
No, I didn't
under
say
this
that.
contract, would have no,
No, I didn't say that, Counsel. I
Well,
said the
well-
responsibility for hiring is the chief's, but the chief is appointed by the mayor as just as we all would be an
Mr. Chairman,
influencer.
if nobody objects, I'd like to ask the mayor, he's here.
He is, Mr. Mayor? Yep.
So we're going to evaluate it and see what's the questions.
Mr. Mayor, good evening.
I was here, Counsel, in the event that there might be a question.
We appreciate that. I mean, these men and women put their lives on the line. We all agree to that. And what they saw today, we don't ever want to see, right? And they see that on a daily basis. And I can't say that I could understand what they deal with on a daily basis because I've never been a law enforcement agent. But I'm just trying to figure out, relative to that position, obviously you support it, you want it. I understand that. Could you just explain again why you think that it's a necessary position in the Brockton Police Department?
Sure. I think that if we look at the state of, I disagree with a lot of what was said. We have really embraced community policing. Every police officer in this department proactively interacts with the residents of the city on a daily basis. I believe the department is fully bought into that. We've tried to, within the limits of our budget, expand some of the community policing functions as separate functions over and above every single officer. We've said from day one, every single Brockton police officer is a community policing officer. That's true community policing. I think that when you talk about walking beats, when you talk about bicycles, that's all part of a larger effort to get officers interacting with residents every day. Because it's a lot easier to speak to an officer who's walking or on a bicycle than it is an officer that's driving by in a cruiser. So to portray that we're not embracing, this is somehow replacing officers interacting, that's just not true. In terms, this position is focused on communication. I think that if we've watched, particularly in cities across this country over the last few years, I think there's a recognition from both communities and policing departments that both sides have to do better with communications. And I think that we've got portions of our community that don't particularly trust the police department, don't have a relationship with the police department, and we need to overcome that barrier. A perfect example recently would be our Citizens Police Academy that we've started running again. It's a great success. We want to expand it because it brings residents in to have a chance to see firsthand what the challenges and duties that the police department takes on every day. So when you look at all of that, then there's the piece of dealing with media, large organized groups, special events, etc. And after having been here for 4 years now and looked at some models, and we can get you some other cities also, I don't know them off the top of my head, but this is replicating a model that's being instituted
So it's not
across
just
the
the city of
country.
Boston?
No, this is a
Okay.
model that I've brought back from attending mayor's conferences and seeing it implemented in other cities. And this is all about being a better communicator. And the fact of the matter is, you're right. We've got 200 great police officers that work for us, 36 outstanding supervisors who work for us. Their training and background and experience is in law enforcement, not communications. And yes, you can take uniformed officers and send them off to a class or a few classes, and they can develop some additional skills. There's no doubt about that. And we've done that with, I think, at least 3 of the supervising officers in that effort. However, it's not the same as having someone who has an extensive training and background in communications, media relations. That's what we're talking about here. Having someone that can directly assist the chief in communicating on behalf of the department, not just with the 100,000 people who live in the city, but all the people that are interested in the city or may work here or drive through here. There's no question that we have a perception issue with the city of Brockton. You know, one of our biggest challenges we try to overcome is false perceptions of the city that are held by people both inside and outside of the city. I believe sincerely that we have to communicate better. The superintendent of schools has a full-time civilian communications person who handles publicity, website, media relations, etc. It's not an unusual position. So I happen to believe it's very important. I happen to believe Jay, what's the total payroll for the police department? Ballpark. Over 20, yeah. So I mean, the police department payroll is over $20 million. We're talking about a payroll of over $20 million.
Do you envision, not to cut you off, but do you
That's
envision
okay.
what Mr. Fowler said, this would be about 90 grand? The
Yes.
salary?
I don't know it's a fair representation.
Okay.
I don't know the exact
And
number.
if this comes to
I
fruition-
think there's a range of 85 to 95 or something like that.
So it's not going to
Let's
exceed
put-
100 grand, let's just say?
No, the
Okay.
range, it's using the same range that was proposed before.
So in terms of if this comes to fruition and passes, do you already envision, I know your current chief of staff was in the running for the previous
Yep.
position. Would that still happen? Do you see a transition where Darren would go there and then you'd?
I think if he wanted to apply for it and go for it, I thought he was a good selection before. I think he was a good selection again. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to be the chief's hire. And I don't know if he would definitely be a candidate. I'd like to think he kind of likes working for me. But I also think that we don't know what the other pool of contenders would be.
Okay.
So that's really a tough hypothetical question. When Darren was appointed to the job last time, I thought he was a highly qualified candidate based upon over 25 years of media experience.
Right.
And, you know, negotiations, it's easy to pick through and say, well, we don't like that, we don't like that, we don't like that. That's not how 2 years of negotiations go. This was a tough deal to get to. And as Councilor Farwell said, and I agree, usually when you get a fair deal, neither side's completely happy with it because there was concessions on both sides. And I think that it would be fair to say that 6 months ago, you know, the differences were this far. And then we were able to get them down to here. And once we get down to here, then with good faith on both sides, they were able to get to a deal. But I also believe it's easy to say what this costs. I watch what's costing in other cities who end up in arbitration and end up going to the JLMC. And usually it's a lot more. So there's the time delay that causes large retroactive payments. It's like the oil commercial, pay us now or pay us later. We're going to pay, and it's not going to be any less than this. And I firmly believe that if we have to go through an arbitration process, it's bad for the department, it's bad for morale. I don't know how I look these guys in the eye and tell them that we've settled 15 out of 16 union contracts, but we're not settling with them. I think that causes a morale problem on the police department, at least in the supervisory ranks. So yeah, sure. Is there public safety unions all watching what each other get and trying to do better for themselves at the table? Yeah, that's how it's done everywhere. And I think that there is, and I'll let Jay speak to it, but there's the precedent has been set legally for parity between police and fire contracts. And we have been working in good faith with both police unions incrementally each time, trying to bridge the gap between the two contracts. And I think that the police unions both understand that we don't have a lot of money and we can't make that happen overnight. But I think that they also have to feel as though that we're making a good faith effort. And so, I mean, I can also go through the contract and give you half a dozen things I don't like about it either. That's what happens in these deals. And I'm sure if you poll the membership of the union, there's half a dozen things in there that they're not crazy about. And Jay's right, in 2 years of negotiations, it wouldn't be a fair labor practice to start disclosing publicly. You've sat in on those negotiations before. There was a lot of stuff on the table. There were a lot of things that this bargaining unit wanted that they didn't get. There were a lot of things that management wanted that they didn't get. And there's some things in here that are compromises. So I believe that this contract was negotiated in good faith. Yes, I know it's a conditional certification by the CFO, just like every other certification he's done going back, how many years, 10 years? Back to the Harrington administration. Every single certification is conditional. Every city in Massachusetts' financial future is uncertain. But I believe that it's even more uncertain and it's more tenuous if we start going into arbitration with our public safety unions. I don't think it's a good management call, and I think it'll cost us more money in the long run.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Jay, just a quick follow-up relative to this. If that specific position is instituted, relative to future budgets, there'll be a line item relative to that specific position?
Yes.
All right? Be a
Yes.
separate line item?
Well, it'll be in the personal services appropriation,
Right.
but in the budget book, you'll see the position, and either it'll be filled by somebody or it'll be a salary in the
Right.
in the budget book. And it's a member of the Department Heads Association union.
So that person would fall into what union?
Department Heads Association.
It would, huh?
It's a recognized position in the Department
is,
Heads
huh?
Association.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Lally?
Sorry to keep you all further. I did have, one or two questions, but the real, the biggest concern that I had was with the new position, the Director of Communications and Community Outreach. When this first came up, in the budget, I voted against it. I didn't think it was a necessary position. Really looking at a lot of the, the requirements or the roles and responsibilities of the duties of this job, I think that you could save the $85,000 to $95,000 and, put something out for a lot of these like social media management. They could be done through an intern. You could hire 3 or 4 interns, not have to pay them anything, because most internships are, if they are paid, the university pays the students, and have most of these issues addressed. I mean, they wouldn't be able to do everything required, but they could take out most of it. It's something, Councilor Rodriguez raised a good point. We do have to be very careful, now especially, with how, watching where the money goes. And I think that there is a cheaper way to do this with, no real effect in quality that we get back.
Councilor?
Yeah.
Councilor, anybody else? Councilor Cruz?
Thank you. Everybody spoken, because I already spoke.
I want to go back to Councilor Powell. He wants, but you haven't spoken. Yeah.
I did speak, but
Okay.
once, but.
By my then.
Just a couple of comments. I mean, number one, I don't like to pull a contract apart because it is just that. It's an amalgam of what's happened at the tables. And my concern is more about managing the department. The money becomes the money, and we are where we are. 2 questions. One, well, first a comment. The Director of Communications and Community Outreach, I couldn't agree more with the mayor, and one of my complaints has always been that we have police officers. As we look at this list of people, we go from low of $118,000 up to $193,000. We want those people with that training at that pay to be doing police work, not communications work. For $90,000, we can have all of these people on the street doing police work. I have never liked it when I see police officers doing IT work. We should be paying an IT person to be doing IT work. Trained police officers who are trained to put their life on the line, it's always frustrated me to see them paid to do other items of work that can be, number one, again, would be paying in the $90,000 range for somebody who, number one, has that experience and that education. And again, does that mean there's never a police officer who can do that work? No, of course not. But it's so much more important to have them doing police work. That I think this is a no-brainer to pay somebody basically half the money to do that job. So I'm glad to see that in there. My one concern a little bit, and again, it is pulling the contract apart a little bit because, I mean, and I'll be supporting this, but I do on the shift bidding.
Yep.
The other thing that I've seen past chiefs, and I've never had the conversation with Chief Crowley about this, but, well, any department head in the city will tell you that the union contracts make running their departments difficult.
They do. They do.
What will the chief, how can he assign, explain a little bit to me about shift bidding, and can the chief say, no, this guy is not good at this job, excuse me, guy or female officer is not good at this particular job, I need to move them. I mean, because that is sometimes where that communications officer becomes so important. We, in the past, and I'm not talking just police, you have somebody who doesn't have good experience at a particular job and causes issues for their own employees, their own brothers in the department. And if the chief doesn't have the ability to move them, or does he still?
He does. He doesn't have the ability to assign them to a shift, but he could move a person from, say, the patrol division to records or to the detectives bureau.
So
that
he still
decision,
has
he has that.
He has the ability
But once
to
the
move
assignment
somebody.
is made and the shifts are being bid, and I think you bid them once a year, am I right about that? I think they bid them once a year. So when that bidding occurs, the assignment has been made, these fellows are, supervisors are now on patrol division. Then the assignment to days or nights or the impact, whatever the different shift is done by seniority on their bid. But the decision to make the assignment in the first place resides with the chief.
So the chief would still have the ability to say, I think these three have the temperament and ability to be detectives. He can
Yes.
still assign them
Yes.
there.
Yes.
And then they get to
Yes.
bid on the shifts.
Yes.
But he can only move them once a year? Is there a process where he can move somebody?
The shift bidding is once a year. I don't know what happens if something changes. Maybe you could address that, Brian.
The shift bidding would be once a year, and it would just be for the patrol division only. So detective bureau, any other jobs isn't affected. There's
Isn't
no shift
affected.
bidding.
So the
Right.
chief still has the ability to
That's
assign
correct.
in
That's
that
right.
case.
And
Okay,
he can, if we do a shift bid, say in September, and due to management rights, he needs to do another shift bid, he can do another shift bid within that year timeframe.
okay, so he can still assign to different departments?
That's correct.
It's just the shift bidding for the patrol
That's correct.
division. Thank you.
Thanks.
And then just my last question, Jay, on that, why would that communications officer, first of all, being a department head's union, he's not a department head, and why would that already be decided that?
Well, because to pay, you need to either have an ordinance or a union position. I think it was bargained back when it was first proposed to be a member of that union. The problem was we didn't bargain with the police unions, which already owned some of that work in their work. So we had to back off and get to the table with the police unions in order to do it. But the recognition of it in the department heads union, I believe, had already been accomplished. And the reason that particular union was picked is the compensation level is high enough it ought to be in a union where the fairly significant pay is occurring.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Council, any other, Council Fowle?
I'm just going to close with a couple of comments. Back in, I think, 1992 or 93, Mr. Condon and I were in this room, and we had called all of the union leaders together, and we told them that we would no longer be able to pay about 5.5% towards health insurance. We were going to have, I believe at the time it was a minimum 15 or 20%.
I think we were looking to get from 10 to 20, but first to
Yeah.
get to 10.
And we didn't worry about the Joint Labor Management Commission. We told the truth about the city finances, and I told them I wouldn't sign a contract without that provision in it. The fire department was the first one to do that. And I mean absolutely no disrespect to you, Mr. Condon. You've been a friend for 25 years, but I wish I had the old Jay Condon back. Because now what I hear is, well, you know, gee, we might end up before the JLMC, and gee, we can't do this, we can't do that. Tell me one positive police operations procedure or policy that we get if this contract is approved, other than, I suppose, the Director of Community and Outreach, which I'll address in a minute. But what do the citizens get if this contract is approved?
Give me a second to go back through it.
Yep.
Please, yeah. We gained a substance abuse policy, first and foremost. I think that was the biggest gain for the city.
Yep.
It was the substance abuse policy, and that took a long time to get. Once we got it with the fire, it was rolled out with the other ones. We got settlement of a couple of grievances, which were going to save money over the long haul. In terms of policy changes, there weren't any other actual policy changes. The rest were economic matters.
Okay. And I understand where the mayor's coming from with respect to having this civilian position, and I would just say respectfully, this is not Atlanta. This is not Detroit. This is not Fort Lauderdale, Florida. This is not Chicago. Let's think a minute when we tune in TV and we see a major incident in Boston, or we see them planning for the July 4th celebration on the Esplanade. You don't see some civilian standing there. You see Commissioner Evans, you see Mayor Walsh, You see the Colonel of State Police if it's the Esplanade, and there's a reason for that. It's the police chief that ought to be out on the street standing up and doing more community relations. It's the police chief who should be more visible, not a civilian. How is a civilian supposed to explain community relations to a community when that person has never worn a uniform, when they've never made an arrest, when they have no idea how a police officer thinks and reacts? All of these people know because it's intuition, it's in your blood. And I think it's a waste of money, and now I'm especially concerned if this is going into a union position, because now we're not just binding our city to this particular position if it goes through with the Carpenter administration and the Crowley administration. It'll be there forever. You'll never get rid of it. The same way with the shift bidding. And that's what I implore my fellow colleagues to think about. When you put something in a contract, it is there forever unless you buy it out. That's what you do. You buy it out. We did it. We got something. We had unlimited sick leave buyback when I came into office as mayor. People were cashing out 125, 200 days. And it had to stop. And we put a cap on it, thanks to Mr. Condon. And the last thing I'm going to say is, if anyone is afraid of going to the JLMC because of a grievance or an arbitration that we're not being fair, I'll walk in with this document every day. That is a very fair package that we are already providing, and if we extracted some of the things that some of us object to, it would still be a very fair package. And I can live with myself with that. I would never turn around and disrespect people who put on a uniform and go out and protect us every day. But I also have to respect the people who cast their vote for me and put me here to look out for their best interests. Thank you.
Any other? I didn't hear a second.
On the motion.
On the motion,
If I
Councilor.
could.
Yes.
Mr. Connick, can you just I didn't understand how you answered Mr. Cruz relative to that being in a union because it was based on a salary amount. One issue was because it was 90 grand, 100
Yes.
grand, or whatever, so it should be within a department head. Is that individual that's a spokesman on the school side part of that?
No.
union? No.
No.
So would this would be a totally unique situation where this person would be put in because there was no ordinance?
Yes.
And because it hadn't been negotiated in good faith prior to?
Yes. Yes.
There are non-department heads in department.
That's true. There's not just departments. It's called the Department Heads
No,
Association.
I understand that,
Yes.
but specific to, Mr. Mayor had done a parallel saying that the superintendent has a spokesperson, so.
Yes, and I don't know whether that particular position is a member of the BEA or is under a contract. I would suspect it might be a contract position over the school department, but I'm not certain.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And councilors, just on the motion, I just want to say one quick comment, because I've listened to all of you here this evening. I've listened to your concerns, and I have some same concerns as you as well. But I think one of the concerns I have is if we were ever to send this back, I agree somewhat with what the mayor said, and I do it based upon the history of the many years I've served, this public and served the school committee and the city council, and worked many contracts that, when you do send that back, then the issue becomes of a time delay, becomes a retroactive pay, becomes an arbitration process, and believe me, I've been through that many times with Teachers Association and some of the other unions, and it's not easy, it's not fun. It makes it very, very difficult, and if the taxpayer thinks that there's a waste, that to me is the waste of arbitration process, to be truthful with you. So, in any case, that being said, there's a motion been made and seconded to recommend back favorably to the full city council. Mel, can you take a?
Prior to that, we had asked for, or I had asked for, before a final vote at the full council, a listing of other municipalities in the Commonwealth that has that position.
We'll try to get that to you.
Yeah.
Council. I think the mayor has made that commitment.
We'll
We'll
get
get
that
it by Monday night for you.
Thank you.
We'll have it for next week's, prior to
Yes,
next
yeah,
week's, and
yes. Yeah.
I would please ask that you email it and mail it directly to our homes, please.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Mel?
Counselor Azak?
Yes.
Counselor Beauregard?
No.
Counselor Cruz?
Yes.
Counselor Aaron?
Yes.
Counselor Farwell?
No.
Counselor O'Lally?
No.
Counselor Monahan?
Yes.
Counselor Castro?
No.
Counselor Rodriguez?
No.
Counselor Sullivan.
Yes.
Doesn't pass.
Can't,
It's unfavorable.
well, you...
Unfavorable
yeah,
recommendation.
Unfavorable recommendation, that's right.
Councilors, I will also say, if you just one point, and that is, this will go back to councilors with an unfavorable recommendation. To pass at council, it would take an 8 majority because it's from the stabilization fund.
Right. Goes back as an unfavorable recommendation.
Yes, sir, because it's from the stabilization fund. I just thought that should be on the record.
Thank you. We go now to the next item, which is number 4.
Order, appropriation of total grant in the amount of $7,781.52 from the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards to City of Brockton Board of Health, Massachusetts Association of Health Boards, Grant Fund, invited Honorable Mayor Bill Carpenter, John A. Condon, Chief Financial Officer, Louis Tabler Jr., Executive Director, Board of Health.
Councilors, Mr. Tataglia unfortunately couldn't be here with us this evening. Contact. Motion been made and seconded to go back to the full city council with a favorable recommendation. All in favor?
Apparently, all I have to do is not speak.
Goes back to the favorable recommendation. Item number 5.
Order, appropriation of $31,000 from stabilization fund to animal control capital, $28,000, to animal control ordinary maintenance services, $3,000, and a transfer from animal control personal services other than overtime, $27,000, to animal control capital, by the Honorable Mayor Bill Carpenter, John A. Condon, Chief Financial Officer, Tom Shelley, Supervisor, Animal Control.
Good evening, how are you?
Good evening, Counselor.
Want to make a presentation, quick?
I'd just like to say the request for the transfer and the appropriation, it's got to do with, Animal Control has a fleet of 3 vehicles. Unfortunately, right now, we're down to 1 vehicle. Apparently, within the last year, new state inspection requirements have come out, which deals with rot and rust issues on vehicles. And 2 of our 3 vehicles, 2 2006 vans are currently out of service right now due to not only rust and rot extensive on the vehicles, but also mechanical issues. So the book value on the vehicle is probably only around $3,000 a piece, and the repairs would be far in excess of that. So I think we're just at the point right now, we're looking to replace both these vehicles. The 2 that are not operable right now would be salvage.
Make a favorable recommendation.
Motion been made and seconded for a favorable recommendation. Back to the full council. All in favor? Opposed? Goes back to the full city council.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you.
Yes.
Council Beauregard.
I'm sorry, while we have Mr. DeChellis up here, could I ask 2 brief questions?
Go ahead.
Okay,
Council.
thank you. I'm sorry, I wanted to follow up, I hope you get this van on the road real soon. Good luck. 2, I wanted to talk to you about, apparently I wore out the first set of batteries, so they gave me a new set here. So yes, the feral cat situation, you were nice enough to come with the woman from the spay-neuter, trap spay-neuter program, and then the whole van that comes out to do the spay and neuter. And I was wondering if you were still working with them, because I know they were relying on grant funding like yourself.
As far as I know, the grant funding, I believe they got a 6-month extension a while back on it. That time has since passed. I think they were trying to get another grant, but I haven't heard anything more on it.
Okay, if I could ask you to follow up, because this is still, a strong concern in the community. And now this one's going to sound a little weird, because I can't figure out where this falls under. Apparently, some of the ducks...
Counselor,
Yes?
I don't mean to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
if you want, file a resolve and bring him back in, because it's not part of the agenda this evening.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So
Okay.
I would rather do it that way, and then he can give you the follow-up of everything that's going on up there at the, at his department, okay? I'd appreciate
Okay,
that.
all right, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. DeChellis. I'll call you back
Thank
up.
Thank you.
Thank you,
We're all set.
councilors.
Thank you. Item number 6, I'm sorry.
Resolved to invite Carl Leno, Brockton Historical Society President and Planning Department Director Rob May, to inform the residents and city council of the responsibilities, requirements, and involvement of the Historic Commission of the City of Brockton. Invited James Benson, the President of the Brockton
Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, councilors.
How are you?
Very good.
Who's going first?
I think I will, if you don't mind.
No?
You might remember last December, we met in a very cold City Hall basement for Finance Committee. And we, at that committee meeting, the Finance voted unanimously to favorably recommend the ordinance change that we had proposed. Unfortunately, it did not make it to the full council for a vote, as it was the end of the year. And so we're back with that ordinance, and would hope that the council would continue to favorably recommend that. Again, for the folks who are listening, there is a historical district commission that has regulatory authority on South Street only in the South Street Historic District. And then most municipalities have a historical commission which has advisory authority over other properties elsewhere in the city. So what we're proposing to do in this ordinance is combine the two boards. It makes it easier to find a sufficient number of members in the community to serve on that board and to carry out those both regulatory and advisory capacities. Gentlemen, would you?
I would think Councilor Cruz.
Point of information, just that was not the Finance Committee,
Right,
the Ordinance Committee voted, unfortunately, it
I
needed a
beg your
third
pardon.
reading and didn't make it
Didn't
because
make it didn't make it, right, exactly.
it seemed to have all the support it needs, and I think it will sail through the Ordinance Committee again. It's just, we did not get the third reading in time for,
Right. And
at the end of the year.
Seeing as that you're still a member of the ordinance committee, could you follow through to make
I
sure
will.
we get it?
I will, and I know Councilor Beauregard filed this.
Or whichever ones, and we'll get it back on is what we need to do. That's what we need
I
to do.
beg your pardon. It was ordinance committee.
Yeah, ordinance. Councilor Beauregard.
Mr. Chair, I filed this resolve, and if we could have Mr. Landerholm and Mr. Benson come up. The reason I had filed the resolve is because I wanted people to understand what this is, first of all, and the benefits to our community. So I've had several conversations with Mr. Landerholm, and we've done some research on some different situations. And Mr. Benson is here too. He's the new president of the Brockton Historical Society and also an author about much of history in our city. So if these two gentlemen could come up to the podium, I'd appreciate that, so we could go over some of the questions.
Knock yourselves out,
Mr.
guys.
Benson?
Good evening,
Welcome.
and thank you for having me here. I would say that I think what Mr. May is looking to have done is very important. I have the pleasure of serving as chairman of the Historic Commission in West Bridgewater. It's very important, especially in a city like Brockton. We have in Brockton a lot of historical assets. We're in a place right now where Mr. May and the planning department are looking at preserving, protecting, redeveloping a lot of these. There are tax credits available, other grant money available, and it really takes the support of the Historic Commission to finalize those grants and that money. The federal tax grants, they asked for the Historical Society to write a letter. I've written letters for Trinity Financial, for Capstone, and for the W.B. Mason project, and they all come back and say the final thing we need is Historic Commission. So without the Historic Commission active and in place, people will be waiting and in some cases not get the grant money they need to preserve and redevelop some of these properties.
Well, thank you, Mr. Benson. But what I'm curious about too is what can the city get for grant money, for example, to protect some of these buildings or identify them, and what process they go to for the registration? I mean,
Offhand,
one of my
I can't tell you
colleagues,
exactly
yes.
on the grants. Obviously, the city can apply to have properties put on the National Register, the State Register, which can make them eligible for certain grants, and they're not as restrictive as people think they are. It doesn't mean you can't tear the building down. South Street Congregational Church is a great example that you don't protect things forever. But it is a start and a way to help
preserve and rebuild the city around its foundations.
Okay, so this is obviously very advantageous for our community with beautiful old homes, for example, and older buildings that might be able, how would I say it, to be damage control. So they would be addressed where there's damage. And in other cases, is it possible in some instances to acquire grant funding to salvage some items? I mean, oftentimes, yes.
You can salvage things. It also is beneficial to the property owner that they can become eligible for applying for grants that help them preserve and protect the asset rather than bulldoze it down.
Thank you. One of these, I believe that we should value the old, and having gone to certain cities where they have like a section and it just looks marvelous and maintained and attracts, well, in some instances, much larger cities, tourism. But the other part of it is too, it just seems that it helps in the impression of a city, how would I say, going forward. And even though that they're respecting their past. And some of these buildings are so attractive. I mean, I hate to see them come down. The other part of it is there sometimes any kind of, how would I say it, collaboration with education. Mr. Landerholm, for example, is involved with doing tours of various buildings in the city to highlight their historic value and what part they played in history of the city and maybe in some instances the nation.
I'll let Kyle answer that since he's involved in it.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. To answer your question, there are many significant buildings that are on the historical register. We had from the Historic Commission a survey of top 100 buildings that we currently have, the full list, and we were paid for by a grant. The Petronelli building is close and warm to your heart.
Yes.
That's on the National Historic Register. However, the weather conditions have deteriorated the back wall to a point where it could be preserved, but it will be very expensive. But it is on the National Historic Register, not just because it was Petronelli's gym. It was a auditorium that still exists with a balcony and a stage. So there's a level of elegance if you have an owner and that will preserve it. But there is no magic trick to coming up with the money to preserve a building. The example of not being able to preserve the building, we were writing a tax credit letter, historical tax credit letter for Trinity Financial and the Gardner building, which was the first place for Stacy Adams' shoe.
Oh, yes.
The deterioration around the elevator shaft had caused it to collapse and waste the floor support. And Building Commissioner Jim Caseri came into the room when we were meeting with the Vice President. He says, "I've got to condemn the building. The third floor collapsed into the second floor, and we're afraid it's going to cascade down." And the building came down. The agreement with Trinity was that they would put a replica of what the building was as Gardner building. Mm-hmm. And they did. They did a fine job. And that's preservation working in harmony with the developers. So we did have a good handle on it.
Thank you. This is what I wanted. How would I say? People understand what this entailed, and as you had suggested, I had gone to the register of the Commonwealth Museum inside and met with some individuals of how to protect these buildings and learn more about what we can do in the future. And that was one of the reasons why I was very big on identifying them, and I just felt that this is something too that the public needs to know, because I don't believe that everyone realizes that there are historic buildings in their city that they might even live next to. And as we come along, as time passes, something that wasn't historic, let's say 30 years ago, could fall under that purview. And those are, what I was looking forward, to learning about this evening also.
I could give you an example of the request for a letter for tax credit on the Alden Products Building up on North Main Street.
Oh, yes.
That was first Howard Shoe, and it was built in 1860. And they've certainly can't call it a historic building because they've placed several additions to it. However, there are portions of that building that were original. They would come under a historic value. So I brought a briefcase full of all of the things that the Historic Commission had done, if you had the question, but you don't need the time. If there are no questions, I'll shut up.
No, thank you very much. This is what I want to know. And I see that Mr. May has come down. Was there something you wanted to add to this, Mr. May?
No, I just,
okay.
I was in the camera angle. I wanted to see. Waiting for FaceTime.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll
You all
defer to
set?
my colleagues, yes.
All right, Councilor Azak, then Councilor Sullivan, go ahead. And Councilor Fowle.
Gentlemen, I would like to just thank you for all you do for Brockton, Mr. Benson and Mr. Landerholm, with the history of Brockton. We really have an amazing history, so I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, and I know Mr. Landholm and Mr. Benson both very involved with the Historic Society, which a lot of people don't know about, but it's a great little place right up on North Pearl Street. If you want to give a little the address, Mr. Landholm.
I will. It's 216 North Pearl. We've been very fortunate with good guidance that there are great displays up there, and we open on the first and third Sundays. This past Sunday, because it was Super Bowl Sunday, we did not open. But the delivery of history, exampling, in June, we generally have the 4th grade and the 5th grade classes from Kennedy School, and we will bus up to 135 in shifts, and they split them between the Fire Museum and the Homestead, and they're treated with the history of what takes place. The other schools, I've done walking tours for West Junior High's 8th grade, where it's the 15 rounds of history in downtown Brockton, and it's packed with history. It excites the curiosity of the young people because they have to know a sense of place. And when you've got an immigrant population of close to 70% of those that are in school, they don't have a sense of place until they're taught how important history is. It's not what happened in the past, but what you learn for the future is something that needs to be witnessed, and the Historical Society does a good job at that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, and we appreciate it. I know I do, so thank you for all you do. And I look forward to this commission. Hopefully it moves into the future and it actually becomes a historic commission. I know I support it, and I look forward to I know there's lots of grants out there, so I hope Brockton's part of that. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilor Sullivan.
Thank you. To Council Beauregard, as chairman of the Ordinance Committee, whenever you file that, we can get the ball rolling and fast track it this session. So if we can file that as soon as possible. And I just want to thank you both, echo the sentiments. I mean, you do so much for the city of Brockton, the history of Brockton, and look forward to your new book coming out about the tragedy in the lake. You got to read all his books. It's unbelievable. But it's not just the business buildings, it's the residential buildings. And being a son of a history teacher here at the high school, my dad had us do a project one year, and I think there's about 12 houses we could locate, residential houses still standing from the 1700s here in the city of Brockton.
That's
so
right.
it's a great thing. I support this 100%. Thank you, and thank you for all what you do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Fowle, all set? Any other?
Motion to recommend favor.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded, send back to the full city council favor recommendation. All in favor? Opposed? Goes back to the full city council. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming. Councilor Beauregard, did you want to take number 9 out of order? Is that what you wanted? You asked me earlier. Motion to take number 9 out of order. All in favor? opposed. Number 9, Madam Clerk.
Resolved, to address distress and neighborhood concerns throughout Brockton that generally arisen due to foreclosure, where the city stands with this issue and those responsible for implementing results, provided Joel Hirschman, coordinator of distress properties identification and revitalization, and the Honorable John Buckley, Register of Deeds of Cook County, Robert Jenkins, Director of Brockton Development Authority, and Brian Moriarty, Director of Neighborhoods.
Good evening, Mr. Jenkins.
Good evening, Council.
You must be first up at bat, right?
No, these gentlemen behind me, it's a team, so, you know, I take my orders well.
Counselor?
I asked for them to come out of order is because they had been in front of the previous city council and they ended up speaking at about 10:30, 11:15 in the evening. So I thought it would be fair for them to get a little bit of a chance to go earlier this time around. And first of all, this resolve was filed because individuals do a great deal in this community to address situations that unfortunately arise. And working closely with the Honorable John Buckley, Register of Deeds, he asked me to file this resolve again because we're once, challenged with Mr. Hirschman, the coordinator of distressed properties, identification and revitalization. And there's a whole lot to that. So I'm going to ask actually Mr. Hirschman to speak first so people can understand what this is about and how what this gentleman does begins to improve blight, address blight and other, unsavory situations with abandoned property and other concerns. Thank you.
Basically, when I was hired from the Attorney General's office, I did a master of all the foreclosure deeds from '08 to present, and I was actually was told that I had to go out and look at every property, so I've probably seen between 2,000 to 3,000 properties. Wow. And after the initial, because I started in 13, the initial review of the properties, I started going out to the auctions itself. And what that did was I could see the properties before the foreclosure deed went on record, because until the foreclosure deed went on record, the bank did not own it. And under the early days, it could take 6 months to a year before a bank, they auctioned off the property, but the foreclosure deed never went on. It's a lot better now. By going out to the auctions, I could see the conditions of the property. I did find properties at auctions that were unsecured, so I called the Board of Health. I called building departments to secure it, and so that was an advantage to get ahead of the situation on that house. I also was involved with the receivership property. I would recommend houses to the mayor's advisory group that were really deplorable and that maybe they were good candidates for the receivership program. And I think when I looked at my statistics, I think 84 houses were recommended to the mayor's advisory committee, and 57, I think 57 administrative warrants were actually executed on properties in Brockton, so we could see what was the condition inside. It seems like that things are slowing down, that at the auctions, a lot of them are being canceled, or because of modifications, bankruptcies, or they're postponed. My only concern is that the last 2 years, there were 300, in 16 and 17, there were over 300 new foreclosure notices that were filed in Brockton properties. And a lot of those will be foreclosures, a lot will go to auction, maybe get canceled or modified.
What I wanted to make sure that came out here is, oftentimes when you look up one of these houses, you find that the individual that owned it died, or that somebody's in, so there's some estate issue, or other situation. This one I also want to let people
Yes,
know about.
a lot of time, well, there's one house that is scheduled for foreclosure, but after I talked to the neighbors, it's been 10 years since that house has been vacant. The person had died. It would have to go through probate. There's a lot of times where people die, or relatives, they just vacate the house. There is no probate done, and the bank just sits on the property too, a lot of times, because they can't find out where the person is, or there is no probate on there.
So in this case, you're sort of a go-between to inform the bank that...
Well, you inform the bank of the condition of the property, if it has to be secured, but then it's really up to the bank to give it to their legal team. And sometimes they'll file, it could be a year, 2 years. There's a long period of time. Sometimes.
Can I ask why it's a long period of time, or do you...
Because the bank does not own the property, and until they auction the property off and go through the legal process, they are not the legal owners, and therefore the house just sits.
Yes, we have some of those houses that are just sitting, and as you earlier mentioned, that you go to the Board of Health, because we've had several instances where things escalate, and there's rodents, etc.,
Yes.
and also sometimes squatters, so you find yourself dealing with the police also, is that correct?
Yes, we've gone into houses where there's administrative warrants, and there are squatters in those properties, and we have to get them cleared out by the police. But technically, squatters may have rights, and therefore, if there are squatters, the bank would have to evict the squatters. I know one house which was just sold on Ames Street, and I had noticed when I looked at the house, there was a little dish up in the window, and I couldn't quite figure out what that was until I got a call from the fire department, where basically the guy had rigged up a, it was a cell, photostatic cell. The guy was, that's how he was getting his electricity to put heat in the house.
Oh, wow. And in some instances, do we find the criminal element residing or hanging out or using this location, a location?
Well, addicts will break into houses and use it as just drug dens.
So if we best describe this, if someone sees a house and they don't see any activity there, no, it doesn't look like anyone's living there, and they contact me, and then I contact you, you're able to let me know all this information, and then once I've had this, discussion with you, and to properly explain this, then you begin the process of identifying and going forward and giving us some more information, right, so that we could be, how would I say, solution-driven.
Right. If, people give me a house, I'll go look, it looks vacant, I'll go to the Registry of Deeds, I'll look up who the owner is, I might Google to see where that person is, and then notify the bank, if there's a bank, to say it's vacant and what are you doing, about foreclosing.
No, thank you very much. Another reason why we had you come up here is because we're concerned that you will no longer be with us, and it is quite obvious if we have about 3,000 distressed properties in this community that you're very valuable to us, and that's what I want to talk.
I wouldn't say there's 3,000
No,
distressed
okay.
properties.
Sorry.
It was 3,000 properties that I actually looked at
Okay.
that had been foreclosed.
All right, so then closer to,
I think, my last day was last week. I think I had an active list of about 150 bank-owned properties on my list that I
Okay.
was just monitoring.
okay, all right, thank you. Sorry for the misinformation there, that's my fault. And so you work closely with the Registrar of Deeds, and we try to identify, and then we work toward another process. So behind you is Brian Moriarty, the Director of Neighbor Works, so maybe I can have him come up for a minute here and see if we go to a next.
Excuse just one
Yes.
second, Council Borger, because I think
Sure.
Councilor Nacastro, do you have a question for Joe?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Joe.
Joe?
Thank you,
One of the
Mr.
other
Chairman.
councilors had a question for you, so.
Good evening, Attorney Hirschman. It's our pleasure to listen to you this evening. Mortgage foreclosures are a big problem in Brockton and have been for some time. I've personally been tracking the number of foreclosures on properties in Ward 4, and so I check the legals nearly every night. My mother-in-law used to say that's where all the sexy stuff was, and it still boggles my mind that we have so many foreclosures taking place in Brockton, and also the age of the mortgages. Many of them are from the early 2000s. I just wanted to say that the secondary mortgage market has done a terrible number on the city of Brockton, and as you alluded to in your comments, that area, that passage of time between when the lender is identified and when they actually act upon the debt by going after the property. In many instances, I think you're aware of, they don't foreclose because they've done an appraisal and decided that the property is top-heavy. There's too much debt. They can't get their money back, so they just kind of let it sit there, which is terrible for our community. You're doing a yeoman's work, and I hope that your grant, the grant that supports your work, is continued, is extended, because no one else is doing this, and we need this information.
And only one other thing I'd like to add is that I was online a couple of days ago. They are now giving out 100% loans again.
It's crazy.
And no document loans.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, Councilor. Councilor Borger now, okay.
Well,
And,
thank you.
So are you here to give us the solution to all this? No.
Well,
No, I'm-
we are
No,
actually...
I'm kidding. But hopefully that we're all, working closely together.
Definitely. We see people way before Joel starts researching. We started our program 10 years ago, last month, and we came to Brockton because of foreclosure. We came asked by the Brockton Housing Partnership to do first-time homebuyer, but Brockton was in a crisis of foreclosure. We've been number one for foreclosure for several years. So we are a community development corporation, state certified. We're a HUD counseling agency, and we do foreclosure counseling. I work with John Buckley on, it's sort of a best practice across the country, that he gives us notices or lists of people that are receiving a notice to foreclose, and we send out flyers to those people where they can get help. It's a great immediate way to get to the homeowners when they get notice, and where they can find out to get help. This year we sent out 302 letters that are getting notice to foreclose. We have 116 foreclosure clients. 67 of those are from Brockton. The other critical thing I want to talk about is first-time homebuyer education. We are big on first-time homebuyer education, and also there's a correlation that if you get first-time homebuyer education, you're less likely to be foreclosed on. So we find it's important that we do first-time home buyer education. Last year, we educated 230 Brockton residents, and 35 bought houses in Brockton.
Oh, wow.
So we're really pleased, and we're grateful to help with the foreclosure crisis. And right now, we're still seeing a steady stream of people coming by. So.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Two things. One of the, generally, when you talk about this, you imply that this is younger people, younger couples?
No.
No? So what about our elderly population that might have had taken out a second mortgage and now there's illness or what have you? I mean, because it seems like some of the homes that the individual that owned it died, and then there's that disconnect.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to call it, a disconnect, yeah.
What we're trying to do is prevent foreclosure. Yes. So success would be modification, forbearance, a deed in lieu of, or a short sale. Anything to prevent foreclosure. Okay. Regards to elderly people, the HAMP program, which is the Home Affordable Mortgage Program, that was started through the Treasury Department through President Obama. That program has ended last year. But we are guided by the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau with their guidelines in regards to foreclosure.
Thank you. I'm going to defer to my colleagues.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilors, any questions or concerns from Mr. Moriarty while he's...
Okay, then I'll call up the Register of Deeds.
Councilor?
Oh, just in general, so I can wait till after
Okay.
Mr. Buckley finishes.
Thank you, Mr. Moriarty. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So now I'm calling up our Register of Deeds. Thank you. And
I will be brief and succinct. It's a long meeting. I asked Councilor Sullivan to pass around a chart and a listing of foreclosures, just to kind of make you all aware of where we are right now in Brockton. Clearly, Brockton was the epicenter of foreclosures in Massachusetts, beginning in 2008. As you can see with the graph, the top number is foreclosure notices. The first document recorded at the Registry of Deeds that shows someone's facing difficulty, and the bottom line is the actual foreclosing deed when the lender's taken back title from the owner. I've also given you a listing of foreclosure deeds and notices for 2015, 16, 17, and even into last month. And you can see even last month, there were 19 homeowners in Brockton that lost their home to their lenders, and 21 put on the notice path heading that way. My only comment, and I know you have other issues to get to, is we worked very closely with many state and federal agencies to develop some really good programs to help out the people in Brockton that needed the help. And unfortunately, as other issues become more in the headlines and more serious, sometimes things like this that are still issues and still problems get kind of not looked at as much, and funding drops off. So in the case of NeighborWorks, they've lost a lot of their funding to do foreclosure counseling. They're basically down to one final grant. The Attorney General's office and HUD have moved on to other projects, and Joel's last day was Friday.
Not good.
So it's something that we all need to be aware of, because those were model programs that helped all of our citizens, all of our mutual constituents, and I'm not here asking for money. In this environment, it's very, very difficult to look to local people to do that, but just to be aware that we all have to be looking for sources wherever we can to kind of duplicate the services that, again, kept so many people in their house. And in the case of Joel, once the houses were abandoned and foreclosed, to take those blighted homes out of the neighborhood and force the lenders to list them. So I know you've had a lot on your plate. It's certainly something that deserves future conversation, but thank you. The honorable wasn't necessary, as Councilor Cruz knows. There's only specific individuals that get that benefit, but I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
And
I can answer questions.
That's why we wanted the dialogue.
You all
Yes.
set to Council Wood?
Yes, I'll defer to my colleagues.
Okay. Councilor
Okay.
Azak first, then Councilor Rodriguez. Go ahead.
Mr. Buckley, gentlemen, Mr. Moriarty, and Mr. Hushman. When we look at your statistics and your graphs, it's a little scary because January 2018 is higher than any other past years. So my question to you is, why Brockton? Why is this happening to Brockton? And do you see that there's anything that we can do, or maybe work with our state delegation? Is there anything, what can we change to change these numbers?
Well, futuristically, I think the federal government and the state government is going to require a lot more buyer education. Many of the mass housing loans requires people to go into homes prepared for all the costs and requirements of being a homeowner. We all want to encourage home ownership. It's a great thing for every community, but I think futuristically that has to happen, particularly in areas where there are challenges based upon income and language issues in some cases. I do think the more urbanized areas in Massachusetts have faced the greatest problems. I know in Plymouth County, which we track every day, it has been Brockton, Plymouth, and Wareham consistently in every month's report. So I just think that is a consequence of the makeup of a more urban community than not. And I think that's why you've seen those numbers in Springfield and Worcester and Fall River and Brockton. However, I think the work that NeighborWorks is doing now for housing counseling is a solution that really ought to be expanded.
And I agree with you. So with the state that Brockton's in, I don't know how we're losing, instead of having funds being added with these numbers, how we're losing these grants, or how we're losing funding. Is there anything we can do to, I know the Attorney General's office works closely. I know Mr. Hirschman worked with the AG's office in the past. Is there anything we can do?
No, there was an approach from the mayor and the Brockton Redevelopment Authority. Robert will attest to that, to try to get Joel's grant extended, and they're just not funding these types of programs anymore. They're
not, okay.
Onto the opioid crisis and things like that that are, trying to solve today's problems, I think,
that's understandable. This is a
I do
huge problem
think
for Brockton.
it's worth looking as you go forward within your existing departments to try to bring some of these components into it as you go through your budget process. That's the only thing I can suggest.
Okay. Now, is there, with these numbers in Brockton, do we notice at all, is it in certain neighborhoods, is it in certain areas, or is it just overall throughout the city that we have these foreclosures?
It's pretty much been, Brian can talk to that a little bit more. Yeah.
It's pretty, excuse me, it's pretty much all over the city. However, years ago, there used to be called a foreclosure monitor program. They'd map it, and you'd always see like North Warren Ave, down to Warren Ave, all those multifamilies were hard hit with foreclosure. The other thing is regarding our National Foreclosure Mitigation Program, which was a grant through Congress, ended last year. But we received another grant for the from NeighborWorks through United Way, financial coaching. And a lot of, I will put foreclosure people into financial coaching, and we can get paid for that.
Okay, very good. That's good to hear. Now, as far as, do we know, is it certain banks or certain companies that are, because I'll be honest with you, we put in an application for a remortgage and they asked for everything. I mean, it was a very long and hard process. So for people to be going through that and then, going through getting foreclosed on is right now, I have a hard time understanding how that's possible. The institutions that we've worked with personally, they've asked for everything. I mean, they're so thorough to make sure that you are capable of paying that mortgage. That's why I can't imagine how these numbers just keep rising.
And there's no particular reason, illness,
divorce,
making less money.
Right.
Divorce. So there's a range of reasons why people are in foreclosure.
Well, I hope next year the numbers will be different. So thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask Mr. Buckley a quick question, because I noticed you did say that the communities that are hardest to hit in the county is Brockton, Plymouth, and Wareham.
Mm-hmm.
How does the let's say the surrounding communities of Brockton, the Whitmans, Abington, the Bridgewaters, how are those numbers compared to, I know you can't, it's comparing almost apples and oranges in the sense because of the size of the community,
Yeah.
but on an average, how does that affect
I can get you those numbers. However, and clearly every single one of our 27 communities have been affected by the issue. However, not to the level of the three communities I mentioned. And it really relates to kind of the multiplicity of the issues that was just brought up by Brian. I think the more communities were affected by the difficulties in wage loss from full-time to part-time jobs, for example, can throw you completely off the ability to make your mortgage payment. And I think we saw that, obviously, the economy's booming now. I think that's part of why the numbers are down. But on the other hand, there are lenders, and I think they can all attest to that are cleaning out all their files. People that have been there forever, they're moving forward with. So I think that's kind of balancing out the two of them. I just think that income levels are different in different communities, and that makes a difference.
But you don't see an issue, for instance, like in Abington and Whitman and the Bridgewaters?
No, they've had those difficulties too,
Yeah.
just not at the level of the three communities I mentioned.
But they have it.
And I think that if you went to not so much Norfolk County, they don't have they have Quincy, which is a different kind of component than a Fall River, Brockton, or Springfield. But if you went out to Holyoke, or if you went to a city like that, you'd find similar problems.
And how's the Brockton numbers compared to the larger communities like the New Bedfords and Lowell,
Brockton
Lawrence?
is one of the more difficult. And the problem is the state stopped tracking all the communities together. For a long time, they were doing it by census tract.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately at the time, and this was back when the crisis really started to hit, after the 2008 crash, Brockton had a significant number of census tracts that they were tracking. But the state, again, the crisis abated somewhat, and that Mass Housing Partnership just stopped tracking census tracts. If you did that today, I would bet you that the communities I mentioned, the real urbanized, lower income communities would still have the highest number of census tracts that had those problems.
Thank you, Mr. Buckley. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I just want to end by, Councilor Beauregard had brought this up. I think it is important to know that it is an ongoing issue, and the problem is combined and severely increased as a problem by the fact that all the funding sources have moved on to other areas. And I don't know what that solution will be going forward, but the fact that it's been brought to your awareness, I think, was a good thing to do. Thank you.
Council Fowl.
Just for Mr. Buckley, do you track any of these by age as a demographic?
No, what we do is use our recording documents. We don't track, our deeds in that way. It's just a foreclosure notice or foreclosure deeds. That's what our software does. I'm sure there are some reports that have been done by different housing organizations over the years. I can look and see if I can find anything relative to the age issues or racial issues or things like that.
Only reason why I asked is that people are living longer, and unfortunately, Social Security, if they live on that, the cost of living is rising faster than any increase in your Social Security. So there are people I know that, depending upon how things go over the next 2 or 3 years, they'll be priced out of their house in Brockton, and it's a very complex issue. It really is. It's not an easy one to address because there are so many different factors.
But in regards to your particular point, I'll do some research with some of the organizations we relate to and see if I can find a report.
Thank you.
Great.
Council Borg.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Registrar of Deeds, thank you. And if it's all right, I want to bring up Mr. Jenkins now for the whole, this is wraparound services this evening. Now, why don't you tell everybody what you do and what BRA is about, because there's some misconceptions.
Misconceptions. Most of you know I'm Robert Jenkins. I'm the Executive Director of the Brockton Redevelopment Authority. I've spoken to many of you, have appointments with several of you. What does the redevelopment do? Yeah, I guess you can take our name to redevelopment because that's kind of what we're in charge to do for the city of Brockton, is engage in its redevelopment. As you know, you passed the urban revitalization. That's, and I don't want to get too deep into the woods here because this is
No, but
too
mostly you
long
want
of
to
a meeting.
highlight about
But
your
let me-
various programs
Can
and
we
also,
just,
yeah.
well, we run, all you got to do is check our website to see the various programs. Let's
Some
talk
people
about-
don't go on the website, and this is what I want people to know about.
Sure.
Yes.
Just a point of information.
Council Fowl.
Just to my colleague, I filed a resolve, which it's due by tomorrow at noontime, but it's already in, so that at the next FinCom meeting in February, Mr. Jenkins and Mr. May will be coming in, and I think we're going to have a lot of wraparound about different issues. So just wanted you to know that
Okay,
tonight.
but this is, no, what I'm
Bullet
looking more
points.
at was
We do down
the,
payment assistance, we do homeowner rehab.
that's what I wanted you to highlight, yeah.
We do first-time home buyer down payment assistance with Neighborhood Works of Southern Mass. I'm used to calling them NHS, Neighborhood Housing, but they're new, Neighbor Works of Southern Mass. We work closely with them. We also do the city's receivership program, which Joel had pretty much touched on just a bit. We do that as well. We also control and manage the city's federal, which is probably our most important job. We manage the city's federal funds and state funds. When you get a HUD grant, we work out an agreement with the mayor's office that we manage those funds for you. The city this year got $1.3 million in CDBG, Community Development Block Grants. I use acronyms all the time, sorry. And the Home Investment Partnership, which the city gets less than $400,000. Interesting thing about the home program, it's mostly for new construction. That's what the Congress has set it up to be. But for $390,000 in Massachusetts, it's almost impossible to do anything, maybe a unit for $390,000. So what we do is we try to leverage that money with private investors, developers. Currently, there are several developments that are going on in the city, large developments. Chatham West on Oak Street, 300 units. We're leveraging a $23 million project with $400,000. There are some things that are happening also in the urban revitalization district that we're looking at using home funds. But to get probably to what I'd like to do is kind of wrap around what the DPIR, Joel's position, Distressed Property Identification Revitalization Program, which is funded through the Attorney General's office, initially through Martha Coakley, and then up until this past year through Maura Healey, Attorney General Maura Healey. They've been in the city of Brockton, which is a little unique, and I usually brag on this, but they were in the city of Brockton when I first came in 2009. They've actually set aside 3 attorneys that I know of when I came here, just working in the city of Brockton on this issue, because we were, or we somewhat still are, we were the pinnacle of, how should I say, bad mortgages in the city of Brockton. And so the Attorney General at that time kind of realized it, and through John, because DPIR is a state program, but we should thank John, because John is the one who thought up DPIR, Distressed Property Identification Revitalization, for the state, which is interesting. Him and other register of deeds got together and said, okay, we know that there's a problem in a lot of these urban areas. And John came up with the program. We got funded. We were one of maybe 3 or 4 that got extended. Joel's been here for 4 years working on this. Joel does more than just DPIR, though. We had the, well, with his expertise, we were able to do title searches on properties. We got down to the real weeds about who's responsible for the properties. Our problem now is that a lot of these properties have title issues and what we now describe as zombie mortgages. There's totally almost nothing we can do with these other than put them under receivership. And quite honestly, we don't have the funding, the BRA or the city, to put every property that is a zombie mortgage into receivership. Joe's main focus was to get the banks to put these properties back on the market, to force them through the AG's office to get them back on the market. He's done a tremendous job. He was a tremendous asset.
Yes.
Well, we'll continue to do our work. It's just going to be a lot harder. And those of you who've been in housing court, Counselor, you may know, that's not an easy thing to kind of sit through. And the wheels of justice, well, the wheels of housing court really do move slowly. With that said, that's the BRA, and that's probably the program in a nutshell.
Okay. Thank you. Just 2 more things. You offer that lead program?
Oh, well, this will come eventually. We don't have it yet, Counselor. You're a little ahead of HUD and the BRA. We are starting a lead program for the city of Boston, city of Brockton. Brockton lost its lead grant about 4 years ago. We've applied for it. We did get funding. We're working out the budget with HUD currently. Conference call tomorrow. Hopefully, I've been talking with Councilor Rodriguez, we can get someone on the at-large member to actually sponsor that, because it is a grant. It has to be accepted. So once that's ready, I'll be calling Councilor Rodriguez or Councilor Sullivan. Yeah, absolutely, because it's something that the city really needs. Once again, Brockton is 3rd or 2nd in the state in children under 5 detected with lead poisoning.
Oh, that's awful.
No, that's bad.
Thank you. And there's just one other part there. The grants that you put the information out for organizations, education, et cetera?
Yes, we do public services. She's been on the website. We do public services grants. We have about 20, public services or social entities like the Cape Verdean Association, the Old Colony YMCA, to name a few, Haitian Community Partners. I'm looking at the list now. BAMSI, Elder Services. We do all these grants, and there's about 12 that we do. And so I can promote. We do have our applications for CDBG and home online. Deadline is February 29th. You can pick those up online.
Yeah, okay.
So those grants, those applications are ready. And we usually get the same folks, but I encourage everyone to apply.
Well, thank you. Again, I'll defer to my colleagues, but thank you all, gentlemen, for coming out and giving us some vital information. And hopefully we can, work closely to come up with a solution for this, interruption in distressed properties identification and revitalization.
Thank you, councilors.
All set, Councilor?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to recommend to move favorably, yes.
Motion been made and seconded, send back to the full city council, favorable recommendation, all in favor? Opposed? Goes back to the full city council. Gentlemen, thank you, appreciate it very much. Our next item is number 7.
Resolved to invite Captain Halsey, the new commissioner of the Traffic Commission, to introduce himself and inform the council and residents any chance he has to include parking problems, speeding issues, and other concerns. Invited John Hallisey, Captain, Traffic Commissioner.
Good evening, Captain Hallisey, how are you?
Good.
Welcome.
Well, my name is John Hallisey. I'm officially the interim commissioner. Captain DeBarry is going to retire. And basically, I plan to do the same as my predecessors, Captain Gomes, Captain Williamson, and Captain DeBarry, and work with the Traffic Commission, Councilors Monahan, Councilors Cruz. And if any councilor has a problem or there's a thing, call me up. We'll get to it. Whatever you guys need, I'll try my best.
Council Beauregard.
Mr. Chair, and I had a few questions. I had already spoken to Captain Hallisey, and you're Captain John Hallisey. Am I correct? There's another Hallisey on the police force?
Yeah, my brother Billy,
Okay, all right. And he is a
lieutenant.
lieutenant.
But he's supposed to be captain the next round. He'll take DeBarry's place.
Okay, all right.
So
I
now
have-
it'll be real confusing then.
No. Okay. And the Traffic Commission meetings are held when, and how can people get a hold of you?
Thursdays, Tuesdays, we have a subcommittee meeting. I don't have the schedule with me. I think it's the 20th and the 22nd. It'll be at Montauk Road, the Old Water Department. And the Traffic
Okay.
Commission's there. We hear problems, but my number's 897-5362. Just call up, leave a message. I'll get back to you as quick as I can.
Okay, and people can email you also, sir?
They can email me, but usually they go through the Traffic Commission. They'll go through the councilors, then they'll come to me, and we'll resolve the problem that have.
Okay, the reason I'm bringing this up is, because people have questions periodically on different items, and sometimes maybe it's not necessary that they have to go all the way to the Traffic Commission, but that you might have the answer, or one of your colleagues. How many people involved with doing all this traffic stuff?
We have 4 officers that are in the traffic
How
unit.
come you have 4 officers and not 8 or 12 or 2, for example?
I believe it's just a money issue.
That's it?
Because they do traffic. If there's a major problem,
Yes.
they'll do a call.
Yes, I
But
understand.
they're sort of, we need them for traffic to do the 3 work on 8 to 4, 1 works 4 to 12.
Okay, so you have 2 8 to 12, 8 to 4,
3 8 to 4.
3 8 to 4,
And one
okay,
4 to
and
12.
1 4 to 12.
12.
Okay, all right. So one of the, a couple of weeks ago, we, how would I say it, supported some grant money, et cetera, and that's one of the reasons why this came up, and I was asked to file a resolve to have you come back up. So one of the, big problems is definitely people parking where they feel like it, when they feel like it, and it, how would I say, it can be obstructive. And my colleague in Ward 6 had an episode right before Thanksgiving, or actually around Thanksgiving, where people needed to call an ambulance, fire truck, and cars were parked on both sides, and they couldn't get down the street. And obviously this was illegal, and when, this is the most alarming thing, is when the fire department members knocked on some of the doors, people refused to move their cars. So I'm wondering, how do you guys step in? What do you guys do in this case?
We resolved that case. We went in the Traffic Commission. We had a subcommittee meeting. We put no parking signs on one side.
Okay.
The other problem was they wanted to park in front of their house. They were still able to do that if an ambulance does come, because I believe there was a medical issue.
Yes.
Now they can get out. Seeing both sides were happy, was it right? Did they?
I've been up, Chair, if that's all right.
Go ahead, Councilor.
I've been up before the Traffic Commission quite a bit, and several times under your leadership, and we've had positive resolutions to this.
They don't always work that way, but I think that one worked pretty good.
Oh yeah.
Okay, thank you. This is one of the reasons, because we still have the winter parking ban, and then we might have, apparently this week, the snow emergency parking. So what's happening now? People are getting the tickets for $50 because they're parked where they're not supposed to be. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And if they get the ticket and they're still parked there, when do you step in to tow
When
them?
there's a snow emergency, we work with the highway. They'll call us up. If a car needs to be towed so they can plow, we tow it.
Okay, thank you. And we had also, with this grant...
Councilor,
Yeah.
I'm going to slow you down.
Sure.
Only because I thought he was here just to give us a little introduction of him being the new
Yes.
traffic commissioner. As for the rules and regulations of the Traffic Commission, which you were a member of last year, I think
Yes.
you're re-asking these same questions, then we have 2 other councils that serve there. So I just want to say to the point of his introduction, what's he going to
Yes.
do different, and let's move forward so we can get to the next resolve, please.
Okay, thank you. No, I wanted to, bring this in together, I wanted to ask 2 other questions, if that's all right. One of them, again, like I said, this illegal parking thing, and I know that this is a real predicament for people, and this is why I want to emphasize, and it's 6 o'clock now, Traffic Commission meetings. They've been relocated. Anyone can come, and people can speak because it's a public meeting. 2 things. Again, we had those grants there, and one of them had to do with texting and also pedestrian concerns. So
I haven't
you were
seen
going
the
to cover
grant
that
yet,
a little
but
bit.
it was a
Yes.
2,400 one, I believe it was.
Yes. Okay, and this was for,
I don't have it with me, but I drive sober one. I don't know what the
okay,
exact
and then okay.
terminology.
And so there was going to be more emphasis on preventing this. Is this correct? Okay. And sending the message out. Now, I'm just asking this because sometimes we have situations where, for example, when Brockton High gets out of school at 2:03, 2:10 there, awful lot of traffic. Massasoit intersection there, certain times, a lot of traffic. Do you have access, I've seen this in other communities, where the police come up to the light itself or the machinery and change it around? Maybe let's say going east, they'd make it the green light longer and the red light shorter or something
Well,
like
I know
that?
during the high school graduation, there's a key to make it a blinking yellow light, and we'll have traffic guys out there waving them in on a major event, but we don't per se do it when school's getting out. We don't do it that way. We do it on a major event.
I just threw that one out. But that does occur, and it's feasible in certain areas in this city. Is that correct?
On a major event, yes, they can.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. No, I appreciate it. I wanted everybody to meet you. Good luck. And I hope that, some other things. Do you get any opportunity to, find out about any other programs that exist or opportunities for grants or
I
anything?
know they're putting in for grants. When grants come in, I look at what the grant is, and that's it's when it comes down the tube. So just to react to whatever we can get, and I'll do anything you guys need.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'll defer to my colleagues.
Thank you, Councilor Borger. Any questions, councilors? Motion been made and seconded to recommend favorably back to the full city council. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you, Captain, and good luck. I'm sure you do a fine job. Thank you. Item number, I think we're on number 8.
Resolved, the Commissioner of the Department of Public Works be invited to a meeting of the City Council to discuss current operational capabilities and potential improvement of snow removal operations for the safety of motorists and pedestrians.
I think.
and children who walk to and from school, provided Larry Brown,
Okay.
Commissioner of the Department of Public Works.
Okay, hold right there. Unfortunately, we do have to take a quick break because he's going to change the tapes and we need to be shut up, okay?
He just got up there.
All right, wait a minute before, councilors, we're going to go back on, so I just want to make sure everybody's all set to go back on. You ready?
They look nice, though.
Meeting back into order. We have the DPW Commissioner in front of us, so welcome.
Well, good evening.
Hopefully we'll get you out before the snowflakes of the Wednesday storm.
I hope so.
Councilor Fowl.
I file this, Councilor Monahan, I have another engagement shortly, so I'll be brief. Seriously, snow removal is everyone's nightmare. You can have an entirely different storm in the northwest section of the city and an entirely different one in the southeast. So I'm going to give you the issues that came into me, and I don't even need an answer tonight. If you want to shoot an email, if you want to do a short memo, if you want to respond back, that's fine. I don't think we're going to hash everything out at this hour. So the issues that came into me were some of the roads were not plowed curb to curb. And I think that's a legitimate, based on what I observed. Some plow operators, particularly if there's no curbing, they may not be aware. The other issue that came in was that the intersections, the snow was piled so high, and I'm talking predominantly that first major storm, that you couldn't see around the corner, so you had to kind of nose out. For example, in my area, if you came down Bigney, you'd almost have to have a third of your vehicle out into Torrey Street to be able to look left to see what was coming easterly on Torrey Street. Sidewalks, obviously, and that begs the question, if you think we need more equipment, are you going to put in for it? Have you had any discussions with the mayor? But those are my issues, and I would be very happy to defer to you to, as I say, cut an email or cut a brief memo.
No, Councilor, I think I can do it real fast here.
Go ahead, then. Yeah.
Everything you said is right. Where there isn't curbs, the plow drivers, and actually we've had some new plow drivers, so they don't know the area that well. So if we always tell them go curb to curb. If there's curb to curb, they should go curb to curb, unless there's cars in the way. If there's no curb, then we start ripping up lawns. So once they know the general area, it'll get done better. As far as the mounds, yes, I agree with you. And you know something? It worked a little bit in our favor because it slowed traffic down. Instead of just coming around a corner without looking, they had to stop. Snow's an inconvenience to everybody. So with that being said, yes, we were cutting some of them down. This last storm, I instructed all my help to evenly disperse the snow on each side if we could. Sometimes you can't because there's a fence or there's a wall.
Yep.
So if that's the case, then I'll go in and do some snow removal if I can. This storm came at the worst time because we had ongoing water leaks. We were 5-6 leaks deep in water leaks. As of today, we've done, since December 20th to today, we've done over 125 water leaks. Some cities and towns don't see that for 5 years. Councilman Monahan can attest to that. The sidewalks, yes, we did. We bought this machine. The machines we have are good for a light to moderate snow, but when you get a heavy 16 inches of snow in 7-hour period, you know, we clean the sidewalks, people fill them in, they clean their driveways, they push them, it's just an ongoing battle. We bought a bigger machine, which I needed anyway, which I was looking to buy, because I have some water and sewer easements, and I have to get in them. So it's got a blower on it, but you can also use it for the sidewalks, so I can't wait to try that out. It's called a trackless machine. It was $166,000 for it, but it's got multi-uses to it. So we're going to try one, see how it works, and then if it does work, I'd like to put another one in the highway department, and I also like the school department to buy one.
Okay. And the last thing I would say is I hope you and your crew have input as to when school is going to go back into session, because I know the superintendents must be involved in it. I don't know if the mayor is, but I would much rather, if we're going to require a lot of students to walk in the street because the sidewalks are still clogged and it's slippery, I would frankly much rather not have them go back to school to give us that extra time to get that work done.
No, I agree.
I'm afraid they hurry back because, let's face it, no one wants to go to school in June. The teachers don't, the kids don't, but I think safety always has to be the #1 priority, and I hope they include you in those discussions.
Well, they do, and the public safety is my #1 issue, because you can't put a price tag on public safety.
No.
So yeah, the sidewalks, and our main focus really is the plow operation. I mean, we have over 365 lane miles to plow, and we also plow 65 miles of sidewalk. And that's not including the 23 schools we have to do, the extra parking lots we have to do, the satellite parking, and we do animal control, we do council on aging. Well, you know it, you were the mayor, you know exactly what we have to do in a plow operation. When we're done with the plow operation, we go into the salt operation. But our number one concern is sidewalks and streets. And we take a lot of pride in it. My director of operations and myself, we're out there through the whole storm. I'm not sitting behind the desk. We're out there.
No,
checking all these routes.
It is a real tough undertaking, and we'll never please everyone. But,
No,
but I do think we can get better. I think it's good to have a post-incident review to see if we can improve things. So
Yep.
I thank you
we,
for
we,
the
we know
information.
we know where we have to improve, Council. But when you get 16 ounces of snow in a 7-hour period, that's a lot of snow.
Yep.
That's a lot of snow, and we have to put it somewhere. We tell them to push the corners back. That's what makes the high mounts. But we can work on that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Council, thank you. Council Cruz.
Thank you. Just a comment on snow removal in general. I think I've been on the council for 12 years, and it's probably, when there's a storm, you get calls, and you can get the same call 2 storms in a row from the same person with the exact opposite complaint. They're trying to block my driveway, and they're trying to do my corner worse than the other corner. Snow removal is a pain in the neck, and it's also something that people don't want to pay for. Just a quick, when you you make a decision, okay, we're going to have to plow. First, what's an hour of plowing cost for the city?
It's about $30,000 an hour.
About $30,000 an hour, and the equipment you're talking about, how often do we get 16 inches of snow in a 7-hour period? Once every 10 years?
Maybe in 2015 we did. I'll never forget 2015. We
Right.
had more than that.
Right.
Back to back
And
to back
again,
to
when
back
you get
storms.
back to back, it becomes even worse. But it's not something people want to pay for. And so they'll complain when things are going on. Problem is now if you do a better job of going curb to curb, you have more snow. Now snow is going to be higher at the corner.
Yes.
And now you have to bring in a front end loader and a truck to get it out of there. It's just, and
that costs money.
And that costs even more money.
You know, I have $2 million to work with. That's probably 4 storms.
And if we get
After
6,
that, we go into a
And if
deficit.
we get 6, we're in a deficit. And then people say, why'd you spend so much money on snow? Because in May, they forget that they were
Right.
mad at you. It's a thankless job, and I think other than trying to get the sidewalks done for the kids, you do the best you can, and nobody wants to pay for the amount of equipment. I get calls all the time, how come we don't have those same kind of plows they have in,
Right.
I got a relative in Manchester, New Hampshire. Well, Manchester, New Hampshire gets averages 8 feet of snow a year. You're not going to pay for that, and it's a frustrating thing. It is what we get the most calls on. I'll come in from being out doing my own driveway, and there's 5 calls, and they're almost always impossible to satisfy, because you have to block somebody's driveway when you drive by. That's the biggest complaint we get. And again, as long as we get to it and do our best, and I think our people do the best job with what we have to work with of anywhere I go, and I drive all over the South Shore for my business, and considering that we're an urban area, I think we do a better job than any of the towns around here. So thank you, and I just...
Thank you. And,
you know,
and we do get a lot of compliments because some of our workers live outside the town or whatever, outside the city in a town, and they'll say, our plows ain't even out yet. We get the Brockton line and you can see asphalt.
Right.
So, and just to touch on another thing, Councilor, that there's over 500 bus stops, school bus stops. I can't get them all. If we get a complaint on one, and it's a busy, like on Oak Street, I know there's a couple up there, we try to get them after the storm, it could be a couple of days after. But during the snowplow operation, the people have to be patient. Wait for us to finish, please. We get a call 2 hours into a snowplow operation, you haven't done my street yet. Or you only made one path down my street. Well, that's what they're told to do, just in case I gotta get a police cruiser or an ambulance or a fire truck down there. Then we'll go back, plow it, and then we widen it out. By that time, everybody else shoveling their driveways, we come down, they throw shovels. I mean, you don't know the abuse that the plow drivers get.
And just my last question would be to do with that abuse. How did we make out with the contractor that didn't want to come back?
He's back.
He's back. Thank you.
He's back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Councilor
Chairman.
Lally, and then Councilor Monahan. Councilor, I'm sorry, I didn't.
It's okay.
Go ahead, Councilor Azak.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Good evening, Commissioner. Just a
Good
quick question. You mentioned Oak Street, and that's where I get a lot of calls, and I understand. I tell everybody to be patient. But can you just give us the overall rule of what we actually cover, like the distance from schools, the city actually, what sidewalks we actually do maintain during?
Well, like I said earlier, we do 64 miles of sidewalks. We try to encompass the school area, but people are now asking us to go down a side street, but there's no sidewalks. So I can't plow the front lawns. Like on Oak Street, we get all of Oak Street. I mean, Maine, Montello, Warren,
So
Oak Street.
are we doing it, or is the school? Because
No,
I've
we
gotten,
do it.
We're doing it, okay.
We do it. I send them out probably an hour after the plow operation starts, and they'll go out. But that storm was too much snow. They were going through, we were pushing it back, we were windrowing it back. And those machines just couldn't go through it. It was too much snow.
And that's understandable. And I believe also residents don't realize that we're all responsible to, if we do have a sidewalk in front of our houses, we're supposed to shovel the sidewalks, which I don't think
That would
is
help, but
enforced,
if they could help us out with these bus stops.
With the bus stops?
Even, I can't get them all.
No, and that's understandable.
Some of
And I
them we
thought
get with the sidewalk plows, we get them so they can stand there. But I can't, the ones, we had about 20 we did in 2015. We just did a total snow removal of those.
So it's not a certain distance from the school that?
No.
So it's just whatever
Yeah,
encompasses
like
the?
we do Oak Street because there's a couple schools there.
Right,
So
there is.
Don't we go from Maine to,
Oak Street, we go from Main Street to Bel Air Street on both sides, and then we do the south side of Oak Street from Bel Air Street all the way down to Chateau Westgate. And that's where it cuts off. I know in 2015, we did add the north side of Oak Street to go all the way up to Chatham West, or up to Pine Estates.
Pine Estates, okay.
since I've taken over, we've had a lot of miles to sidewalks that were never done before.
Okay.
And if it's legit, I mean, we'll do it. I
No,
have
we're
no
thankful
question
for that.
doing it,
Thank
it's
you.
just patience.
Oh,
We'll get
definitely,
there.
and we stress that. And
I only
mean-
have 80 employees in the DPW, that's it.
Right.
So,
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome, Councilor Lally.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll be quick. It's a school night.
School.
All right. I just want to thank you and your department for all the work you guys did through the last couple of storms. Whenever I called, somebody answered. I spoke with constituents who had people. They said they'd call and somebody would be out almost as soon as possible. For the most part, people were really happy with. Happy with how things were handled, especially given the conditions. And I think I have to agree with Councilor Cruz. Other communities around here, I saw people say it online. I heard people say it over the phone, and I saw it myself. We responded quicker, and our roads were cleaner. So I just want to thank you on behalf of my residents.
we take pride in our snow operation. That's something I really enjoy doing, is snow.
Councilor Monahan.
Not much longer, but.
Larry was talking, we only have 80 employees, plus the water department was working 2 weeks straight because I was out there working with them with all those water main breaks. So you have the water department guys also plowing too. So you had these guys working this is no lie, 24 hours a day for 2 weeks, these guys are out doing water main breaks and service leaks. And then the snowstorm comes. So for what the employees that we have, how many hours they're working, I don't think they could have done a better job than what they did now. And the people that wanted to complain on Facebook and everything else, whining about everything, the kids on the sidewalks. I was down West Elm Street. Both sides of the sidewalks were plowed. Where were the kids walking? In the street. So I didn't want to hear the complaining.
Yep.
They did a good job, and they're to be commended for that, and especially with the 2 weeks of weather we had like that.
Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I just want to echo some of the sentiments that have been expressed here. I mean, it's been there's been a major change in terms of perception from the residents towards the functionality of the DPW in the last few years. We got to be realistic about this. The responses have been great and more frequent. The callbacks have, at least from yourself, has been on the point. I mean, I spoke with you the other day. I think you were in Florida, I think.
Yeah.
Were you in Florida?
Yeah.
Yeah, on vacation, of course.
Yeah.
But at least it was nice and warm down. Maybe it wasn't all that warm, but
Got a little cool down there, too.
It is. But the response has been great, and I thank you for that.
Well, thank you.
But I just wanted to know, what does your snow budget look like?
Right now?
Yeah, how much
I
have you gone through?
I have
and how
1.1
much do you have
million.
left over? Huh?
I have 1.1 million left. We've had 11 events. Either it's been black ice, inch and a half snow. A lot of this has been going into salt. We've been salting. We've had 2 plow operations. I think the big storm was 427,000, and this last one was 279. The 6-inch storm we had.
So, isn't there a cost associated per inch of snow? Isn't there a formula or something that says for every inch of snow that you get, it costs X, Y, and Z number to clear it, or is it just
I've
the other way
never-
around?
No, because, I mean, snow rates vary, so, I mean, you may be plowing snow for 6 hours with a 6-inch storm, you may be plowing snow for, 10 hours in a 6-inch storm. Once we call the plows out, we own them for 6 hours, and, we plow until the snow stops, and we clean up, and then we leave. But it all depends on duration.
Okay.
Duration and the texture of the snow. It could be a heavy wet snow, it could be a light snow that we could just blow through. If it's a heavy wet snow, it's a little bit harder to push.
We also, last year, I think, had talked about, buying, I think you did say you bought some of those smaller blowers, like the ones, I see them in Randolph all the time. They go down, up and down the sidewalks, and they actually blow the snow instead of just pushing them around. Were you able to purchase some of those as well, or?
We had 4 of them. I had 2 of them break down because if they'll grab, just the trash is out, was buried, or it grabs a brick. 2 of them broke down on us. Like I said, the ones we have are not made for city sidewalks. They're made for like the high school and the schools, that there's not too much in the way. The one we just purchased, yes, there's a 50-inch blower to it, and then I bought a 75-inch blower, where if I have to widen some streets now, we can do it in-house, a lot cheaper. I can go down the street and blow it right into a truck, and off it goes. We can do that with our city guys after the storm.
Okay.
So I think it's going to be a good piece of equipment, because we'll be able to use it through the whole DPW, not just during snow.
So are you praying for snow so you can try it out, or?
I don't want any more snow, Counselor. I said I like doing snow, but it's going to make me retire earlier than I want to.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Question, Commissioner. Around the schools, are the custodians doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Yes.
Because when I was here at the school committee,
Yes.
there was one thing we set in place with Joe Beige was the fact that they were supposed to be doing all the prim outside, sidewalks, even forest steps, different points.
Yes.
Because that was an issue we had some years ago, that they weren't doing that, and that's something that we created. I just want to make sure that they're
Yeah,
doing.
no, we have a great working relationship with the school and Ken Thompson and Mike Thomas.
Great.
They
wanna make
even go out and help us a little bit where we can't get with our heavy equipment. They have like 5 or 6 pieces of equipment now with little sanders on them, and we give them the salt, and we couldn't work better. We work great together.
Good, okay.
And
So
we're
it's
always
working.
talking together.
It's still working after all
Because the
these
school
years.
lots, that's a lot to do, just to keep the high school clean. I have to have 2 big loaders up there.
Of course it is.
And they stay up there,
Good.
keeping this clean.
All right, that's good. Good. Any other
So-
questions, councilors?
Motion to recommend favorably.
Motion been made and seconded to recommend favorably to the full city council. All in favor? Opposed? Goes back to the full city council. Thank you, both of you gentlemen. Councilors, before we depart, number one, we're going to slow down on some types of resolves that are coming to this committee. And I'm not saying you cannot file resolves, you can file them, but after this point, after this evening, as I set the agenda as the city council president, as chairman of the finance committee, if I see 4 or 5 different resolves that are bringing different groups in, I think it's tremendous, but however, I'm going to decide what night they're going to be heard, whether we'll hear 2 that night, 1 another night. We're going to slow it down a little bit. Again, it's great when we bring everything, to this forefront. It's becoming more like a community meeting than it is really the fundamental process of what we should be doing here, and that's really the finance. We do our work, and we start to, make the appropriations that need to run the city. So I'm going to control it a little bit more tighter than what it's been controlled, and I think it's going to work. It will work, well for us all. But again, I'm not telling anybody they can't file a resolve. I just think we just need to slow it down a little bit. So. With that being said, just a reminder, we're still meeting here for the rest of this month, which means next Monday. The 12th will be here for council at 8 p.m. Following week will be a holiday, so we'll be here Tuesday the 20th at 7 p.m. and then Monday we'll be here the following Monday the 26th at 8 p.m. for council. When I go to City Hall tomorrow, I know there's been some concerns about councilors receiving their mail. I'm going to talk to the city clerk and see what we can do to get this mail situation alleviated. I don't know if you've been downtown at all. I'm sure your mailboxes are full. It seems like there's some miscommunication on how we were going to hopefully have the operation in the mail. I know when I sat down with the clerk at the end of last year with outgoing President Sullivan and I, we had conversation with what we thought we had it resolved, where the mail would come up once a week to every meeting, but obviously it hasn't been that way. So I've got to solve that. But I think you're getting mail from department heads because I've asked the mayor to do that. And you heard me tell Mr. Condon tonight, whatever he's going to give us for the next meeting, to make sure that we have it sent to our home. I think that's been working. So I just want to mention those few things. That being said, tomorrow is a holiday. It's Jack Lally's birthday. So this thing of going home early because it's a school night, you're 21 now. You can go home later. But in any case, oh, God. All right, we'll let you go home. Anything else, councilors? Councilor Azak.
Moment of personal privilege.
Yes, you may, Councilor.
Just to comment on, you just mentioned the resolves. I do have to mention that I have had two issues that are happening that I've dealt with. One of them is Walker's Playground, which we approved a grant for months back last year. But there has been a lot of misinformation out on social media. So what I did do is I did file a resolve to bring in our department heads just to bring us up to date with what is actually happening. So that will be coming with your approval in the next few weeks.
That's information of importance because I think we all want to know what's transpired.
Correct.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why I filed that, so we're all on the same page and we can ask our questions.
Right.
The other one is with the new trash recycling curbside pickup, which is a new program that's coming to the city. So once we're hoping the city will implement that in the coming months. So within the next few weeks, it will be educational. The DPW commissioner was just here, and Pat Sullivan from the Recycling Center will be here to inform us on exactly what will be taking place, so instead of some misinformation also being out there. So those are just two resolves that are coming up, so I hope you will approve them. And
those are the two resolves for the next couple of meetings. See
there
that?
You go.
See, we just made that simple, right? There
Well,
we go.
thank you.
No problem with that. Anything else, councilors? Seeing none, meeting's adjourned.
Are you kidding me? My mom's gonna flip out. I've got to get home to my kid. I'm like, uh-oh. Say it again?